Hello, everyone. I am Sacrabolic, your envoy of hope, and welcome back to WIWR. Dual Parallel Trouble Adventure is about a boy named Kazuki who basically hallucinates giant mech battles happening all across the city, but they don't really have any functional impact on the world around him other than the fact that he is hallucinating, and he will not stop telling people that. And everyone around him thinks he's absolutely insane. So one of the most popular girls in school, named Mitsuki, ends up coming up to him, asking him about his robot hallucinations, and bringing him to meet her dad, who reveals that he thinks Kazuki is basically seen another world, and he wants to send Kazuki to the other world. Due to a mishap, Kazuki ends up going there. Turns out the world is real, and people are having giant mech battles to basically try and take over the world. The anime itself takes a lot of inspiration from Evangelion, especially the opening, and I would also say the design of the pilot suits and the design of the mechs themselves. Even some of the characters seem to be taking some Eva inspiration. If I were to sort of give an example of how Duel functions, something that a lot of people don't really bring up or remember about Eva is that the first, roughly the half of the show, maybe even a little bit more, is actually relatively lighthearted and comedic. And Dual Parallel Trouble Adventure is if the tone shift just never happens. It just, if Evangelion was always as lighthearted as it starts, that's what Dual Parallel Adventure is. But it's even more lighthearted than that, I would say, in that even in Evangelion in the beginning, they were at least in danger. And in Duel, the person who's trying to take over the world will just allow you to surrender a bunch of territory, and then just like no one dies. Like it's a war where actually there have been zero casualties. It's actually kind of fun. Anyway, yeah, they have just giant robot fights to figure out who's going to take over the world or if they can stop the Doctor. And this was all caused by the discovery of some sort of like ancient alien artifact or some bullshit. The connection this has to Tenchi Muyo is very tenuous at best. Apparently, in one of the GXP novels, it was revealed that this takes place on Earth, but not the Earth that's the normal Earth that Tenchi Muyo takes place on, but some other distant Earth that's almost exactly like normal Earth, but not the same Earth. And also this could take place up to 1 billion years beforehand. So this is in the main continuity on Earth, but a completely different Earth, which is a level of divorce from the mainline series that does not need to exist. This could have very easily just not had anything to do with Tenchi, or, more importantly, the ending where they end up merging the different realities. You're never going to watch this, fuck you. It could have just been the Tenchi Earth. And if anything, I think that could act as a better explanation for why the Tenchi universe is as crazy as I assume it is. Regardless, this sort of like romance comedy mech series that doesn't take itself too seriously, except for when it unnecessarily parodies Eva, is honestly something I've just been missing in anime lately. They really don't make this sort of like 90s harem rom-com anymore. I will say that this show doesn't do the romance angle particularly well. Basically, for whatever reason, all of the girls are just obsessed with him. The only one I think with any actual justification is the one where Kazuki actually saves her at the very beginning of the series. That one seems a little more justified. And I can maybe see Mitsuki because she has this whole arc where she comes to like him throughout the course of the series. But like, D's just attached to him because that's how D works. And the second Mitsuki, I guess it's the only boy she's ever interacted with. I don't entirely know. Anyway, yeah, the characters in this are really charming, and I actually basically enjoyed pretty much everything about this show. The one thing I will definitely say is that the character, the main Mitsuki that you deal with, is very tsundere and a bit bitchy at times, but I really appreciate her character, because when she's ranting about the mistakes the main character makes, she's right 100% of the time. Like, her rants are like, hey, you should eat food, and have you considered changing your clothes and taking baths before? And maybe you shouldn't be helping the enemy. And so they portray her personality as a classic bitchy tsundere, except for she is completely right all the time. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate the fact that her character and the aggression that she sometimes displays is coming from a place of well-meaning concern. I also appreciate that she is mostly not violent. There's a few scenes where she smacks him, but they don't do this over-the-top thing that you might be used to. It's a very much more down-to-earth, and it's also worth noting that the smacking thing is a bit of a running gag in this, because they also smack, like, her mom twice. Everyone slaps her mom, and let me clarify that this isn't some wife-beating joke. Her mom is literally the main villain of the entire series, so it's pretty much always justified in that case. Anyway, yeah, this, I don't think this needed to be Tenchi related, but I will say that if it wasn't, I probably wouldn't have watched it, and that's actually a shame, because it's actually kind of good. Dual Parallel Trouble Adventure Special takes place after the first season of the series, the only season of the series, I guess, actually, after the universes are merged together. And what this really does is show us how the universe merge works and how the characters are sort of acclimatizing to their new situation. So we get to see Kazuki's friends start fucking with him. We get to see, like, bouts of the girls' jealousy and meddling in each other's relationships. And they get a dog, and then we get resolution to the artifact found in the ocean at the end of the original series that was causing the earthquakes. And all of this is really just used in service for a gag. It's definitely it's an epilogue that sort of gives you a bit more information on the characters post-series, but it doesn't really set up anything or elaborate on anything or necessarily conclude any arcs or anything. I would have liked to see at least Kazuki, pick one of the girls, for example, but it's very wishy-washy. And honestly, the only reason I'm even bothering to review this is because it is a Tenchi Muyo adjacent entry, and I feel obligated to it for the episode of Water I'm putting this in. Photon, The Idiot Adventures was an anime I actually found a little bit confusing in parts, so I will do my best on this synopsis. But basically, an alien, I guess they're all aliens, ends up crash landing on a planet because she's looking for the Aho furnace, which I guess is like a major source of what is essentially magical energy that her grandfather left in his ship. And there is also a boy, and they crash land on what's known as Sandy Planet. And the reason this is part of the Tenchi water is because Sandy Planet is apparently the planet Geminar, which is part of the Tenchi spinoff, but it's like 10,000 years in the past. So this is tangentially related to a Tenchi spinoff. Anyway, yeah, so this takes place on Sandy Planet, or Geminar, 10,000 years in the past. And the people on Sandy Planet have Aho energy. Everyone has their own special little ability that of various degrees of power. One girl can basically stop time locally for the people around her. The main character's name is Photon Earth, and he just seems like super strong, basically, is his gimmick. But yeah, they all have little abilities and can tap into Aho energy. And so, because he has a disagreement with his semi-adopted sister, Photon ends up encountering the crashed alien spaceship, and she was called an idiot, so he's got the word idiot on the brain, and he has a marker, which is considered a holy artifact on their planet, because I guess advanced technology is unheard of. I don't think they get too much detail into that, but it's sort of self-explanatory, I suppose. Anyway, so he has idiot written on his forehead. I forget if he does it himself or who writes it, but the point is, he ends up writing it on the alien's forehead. Well, in their culture, when you write your sigil on a person's head, that's basically a sign that you've gotten married. So he ends up accidentally marrying this alien woman, and he vows to protect her, and she continues her mission to try and find the Aho furnace. Now, hold up, because she's not the only alien involved in this, and we're using alien relative. Just assume if I'm saying alien, I mean they're not native to Sandy Planet. Regardless, there is a space guy, a space lord, who has a bunch of wives, somewhere in the ballpark of 13 to 18. They say different numbers, and I'm not very clear. Regardless, he is trying to marry the daughter of the Galactic Emperor, who I think is supposed to be dead, but it gets confusing in the final episode. I'm going to be honest, the final episode is so fucking wild that it made me lose track of what was happening in this. If the final episode didn't happen, I would be able to tell you what happens in this anime with such greater degree of confidence. Regardless, he is trying to marry her for the position. He's trying to make her one of his wives, but he also is looking for the Aho furnace so that he can use it to become a god and then rule over the galaxy / maybe universe. I don't know if I added the word universe, but the point is he's trying to become a god using the Aho furnace. So he is trying to track down the alien whose grandfather had the Aho furnace. So what this turns into is a sort of journey where Photon, his new wife, and his adopted sister / childhood friend who has a crush on him, but he has a crush on her older sister, get into comedic shenanigans while being chased down by a sort of Team Rocket-esque supervillain who is flanked by a bunch of women who all look exactly the fucking same. It's honestly pretty charming and funny for a good majority of it. I do think it gets a little confusing, but it's basically your classic 90s shenanigans. You've got your hot spring episodes. You've got your bartering episodes. There's a lot of jokes about stupidity in this. For example, it being called Aho Energy and the English title including The Idiot Adventures and everyone talking about being an idiot. And the weird part about that is that most of the characters actually aren't all that stupid. Even Photon, who's supposed to, I assume, be the dumbest one, is honestly showed varying degrees of intelligence throughout the show. So if they're trying to all be stupid, I have seen anime where all of the characters are way fucking stupider without trying, let alone this one where they're trying to be stupid. Without getting into too many details, however, a very bit player character is revealed to secretly be the puppet master behind the entire thing, and there's like 30 plot twists in a very short amount of time, and it is so fucking wild and insane that it's like, I followed it, but like a character had their soul wrapped with another character, and then like one character's soul was protected by another character's souls. They don't mention souls into this point, and then they introduce anti-Aho energy, and then a ship explodes, and then one character turned out to be another character's father, and then another character turned out to not be the daughter of another character, but is actually the granddaughter of a separate character. It's like, so the final episode just fucking loses the plot, if I'm being honest with you. If they could have tightened it, honestly, if it was like a funny romp and then they beat the villain at the end and he blasts off again like Team Rocket, it would actually kind of have been better. I think the last episode was a serious misstep. Regardless, Photon isn't a terrible anime, and for what it was enjoyable enough. Spaceship Agga Ruter is a hentai series about a guy who lives on the alien spaceship from a long-dead alien civilization with his adopted mom / sex android who teaches him how to have sex and also raises him, who is also from the same civilization, and they're getting chased down by a supervillain who basically killed both of his parents. We don't super know why, other than he wants the sex android and the spaceship, and he wants something else called the Virginia, but that is basically the idea behind it. And while he was on the ship, the main character and his sex android, she taught him how to have the sex real good, is what she taught him. So the evil villain ends up hiring a space pirate to basically kidnap the android and take the ship, but he ends up betraying her, which was terrible idea on his part, because he almost had both of them in the hands, but then the betrayal ended up fucking him over. If he had just given her the actual money, he would have been fine. Doesn't matter. Point is, so she ends up joining the hero side. Well, turns out that the space pirate actually has some sort of problem where she is genetically modified from, I want to say, Fighter Planet or some stupid bullshit, where whenever she is sexually aroused and she is having sex, she turns into a horrible cat monster. But the main character is so good at sex that he can make you orgasm just by touching your hands. Like, he can just poke you and then you orgasm. And so he's so good at sex that he manages to calm her down by sexing her really well. And so she ends up having to move into the ship with the sex android because he's so good at sexing, and he's the only one she can have sex with. Anyway, they end up getting arrested by the space military, and then this brings into the formula that basically every episode of this series goes with, where a sexy alien lady, pirate lady shows up, or an alien military lady shows up. Some shenanigans happen. Then the main character manages to win over the sexy lady with the power of being really good at sex. And then the OVA ends with the implication that a new higher authority sexy lady is going to show up. So the first one was Space Pirate, which ends with the military showing up. And then the military leader's commander shows up at the end of her OVA. And then the commander of that leader's shows up at the end of that OVA. And then there's only 4 of these, but there is an implication at the end of the 4th one, because this does not complete its storyline at all, that they were going to introduce the leader of that one. So we were like 5 degrees down of how many leaders we were getting into in this. And it got really sort of formulaic. There's some gags that are kind of funny on this, but like basically the main character solves all of his problems by being like super sexually aggressive on the prompting of his sex android, which is a major plot device. I will say that he has had no interactions with other people outside of his adopted mom sex android, so he doesn't know how to behave in situations. So he's almost like childlike in his sexual assault in episode 3 or 4, and that he quite literally doesn't know any better because the only authority figure he knows of is like, definitely fucking do that. That is definitely how you should be behaving. But it does work out because this is a hentai series. So what I will say is this has a connection to Tenchi by apparently somehow the characters in this appear in Tenchi Muyo at some point. But according to the Tenchi Wiki, it isn't clear which characters or how, but it is apparently officially connected and in the same universe. Now, as far as this goes, apparently this takes place about 15-ish years before the start of the first OVA. And what I will say about this is, 1, the story doesn't go anywhere because it ends in episode 4 and they were setting up material for episode 5. I assume this was probably supposed to go for 5 or 6 episodes, and it just wasn't popular enough. I can't fucking imagine why, because nothing ever happens. But one thing I do want to bring up is that this is the 3rd of the prequel unrelated Tenchi stories where there is an ancient alien civilization with super advanced technology. Now, we know that the previous anime, which was Photon, was actually in like an alternate universe or something, which is Geminar. So I'm assuming that was probably a different ancient alien civilization, but who's to say how advanced this ancient civilization it was? Maybe they could have changed between like reality, which is apparently why Geminar is important in the first place, is because people change realities to get to it. So it's possible that all 3 of these ancient alien civilizations could be the same one across billions of years, because Duel took place 1 billion years before this. Or it is possible that the Duel civilization was the one that appeared in Geminar and Spaceship Agga Ruter. Or it's possible that these are 3 ancient alien civilizations, and there's just an abundance of ancient alien civilizations in Tenchi. It's not made clear in this, obviously, because all of these have very tenuous connections in the first place, but I guess I will find out going forward. Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki is about a teenage boy named Tenchi who accidentally, on purpose, unseals a sealed away space pirate who most people were assuming was a legendary demon who was previously sealed away by his ancestor, we'll say. After the space pirate tries to kill him, but probably not really, but maybe, but probably not, her presence ends up getting picked up by the stepsister of Tenchi's ancestor who sealed away the space pirate, and also the little sister of the stepsister / I forgot to mention this part, fiance of Tenchi's ancestor. Shortly after that, a cop shows up to investigate the scene, and then an evil supervillain comes up to try and acquire like a whole bunch of power from like a magic spaceship or some shit. I don't know. It kind of lost the plot at the end there. The primary thing around Tenchi Muyo is that this is sort of a surprisingly action-heavy series. Like, this is basically an action show, but it's also a harem comedy. There are some romantic elements to it, but romance is not so much as the focus. It's a very classic 90s harem comedy. And to that point, I will actually say that I think the harem elements of this probably drag it down a little bit. There are two female leads in this that are stronger than the others. There's actually one that I would say is stronger than any of the others, which is the demon / space pirate Ryoko, who is easily the most interesting character in the entire show to this point, and also has the most interesting relationship with Tenchi, because it's revealed that she has this sort of like backstory where she's always been watching over him in spirit form whenever he tried to visit the cave she was sealed in, and he appears to have seen her upon occasion as a child. So they have this sort of connection, but that's also contrasted with the fact that he assumed she was a monster, and so she like fake tried to kill him, and now they have a semi-antagonistic, semi-friendly, semi-romantic relationship, which is actually pretty interesting. The OVA itself could probably sustain itself just on the relationship between those two characters. I will say that the stepsister / fiance of Tenchi's ancestor, Masaki, also has an interesting relationship with Tenchi, because she also tried to kill him at first, but part of a misunderstanding where she believed that he was in league with Ryoko, who was the person that her fiance / stepbrother was supposed to try and seal away / defeat / kill. We'll say seal away. But after he ends up saving her and she comes to accept the relationship that he had with his ancestor, you see her come around on Tenchi. And this change in her opinions of him and this switch in the dynamics of it is also quite interesting. So over the course of the series later on, those two end up sort of semi-fighting over Tenchi, where they also seem to be almost tsundere in their denial of their own feelings outwardly, even though there seems to be some acceptance internally. And they have this sort of like love triangle rivalry going on that's actually pretty interesting to watch. They have a very good dynamic with each other and with the male lead, which is something you don't see super often in harem comedies. But outside of that, there are at least 3 other girls that are introduced in this, which is the younger sister, Sasami, who is a character, and then they also introduce a space cop, Mihoshi, who is said to be a very good space cop who managed to accomplish a lot of stuff, and then she got like overworked, and now she just sucks, and she is just a complete nightmare for the department. And they show that there are literally an entire desk full of like dictionary-sized reports about the amount of damage she's caught. So apparently she was really good, according to the main villain at one point in a throwaway line, and now she is just absolutely the worst cop possible, and they literally send her to Earth specifically to get rid of her, the police force do. And then towards the end, they introduce a character named Washu, who is the mother of Ryoko. And I will say these 3 girls, at least introduced into the OVA, and I think Mihoshi was introduced in the third of the 6 ones, so much further along than the other two. They just don't like, and Sasami was in there from the beginning, they just don't really have as much stakes in what's going on. Like, you can tell that they're part of the harem, but their integration and their dynamic with the others isn't very strong. I will say that the show itself is actually pretty entertaining. It does have its funny moments, and I wouldn't necessarily say the combat is the most engaging thing ever, but I've seen worse fight scenes, and I think the way it's portrayed sometimes can be pretty interesting. So it's not the greatest thing ever. It certainly didn't blow me away, but for an introduction of an OVA, it is probably not bad. It's pretty good, I would say. Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki, The Night Before the Carnival, is a special 1-episode OVA that takes place after the original Tenchi Muyo OVA, where we get to see how the characters are getting along after their major threat has been dealt with. One of the things revealed in this OVA is that Tenchi, apparently when he has a ring, he just has a war form now. So he was like, well, I guess I don't need this, and he takes it off and he transforms, and it's like, whoopsie. I don't think that plotline got resolved, actually. We do see Washu doing tests on him, but that sort of evolves into a joke about her collecting a sperm sample. So, yeah, I don't think we really got a resolution to that. What this is mostly focusing on, however, is Ryoko and Ayaka Misaki. Everyone in this is called Misaki, and I'm going to start calling her Ayaka. I'm going to start calling her Ayaka because everyone in this is a Misaki, and I think calling her that in the original review was not super helpful. Anyway, yeah, this is mostly about Ryoko and Ayaka just trying to seduce Tenchi as best they can, and obviously Ryoko is just naturally less effective at this because there's almost an implication that Tenchi might have a thing for Ayaka, but he's very cold to Ryoko. So in order to, they make an alliance to try and get rid of the other girls, which ends up sending Mihoshi back to space. She comes back at the end because, of course. But I would say the funniest and best part of this OVA is that Ryoko and Ayaka end up reading Tenchi's grandpa's like old romance manga, which was from like 10 years ago. And so they start doing this like really ditzy girly girl, it's almost pseudo tsundere, but not all the way there, sort of like thing where they're trying to seduce him. And also they kept introducing themselves to him because I guess that was part of their studying material, even though he obviously knows who they are. It's actually hysterically funny. Like, I was in fucking stitches during this scene. Other than that, there isn't too much to talk about. It's kind of just generally charming and funny, and it's doing well in ingratiating the characters at this point. I feel a little more attached to Mihoshi after this because she did get some amount of screen time, but I do think Sasami is still a little underdeveloped. But this is still pretty early into the series, and I am interested in seeing where this is going over the course of the next 600 spin-offs and 7,000 seasons. Tenchi Muyo Galaxy Police Mihoshi Space Adventure starts off with the main Tenchi crew talking to Mihoshi and wondering how she ever became a Galaxy police officer with her bumbling ditzy nature, where Mihoshi mentions that she's actually a pretty accomplished detective, which actually goes along with what the villain said in the original OVA. And so she ends up telling the group about one of her previous adventures where she managed to save the universe and investigated the case of a space pirate trying to steal ultra energy matter. Now, what ultra energy matter is absolutely not clear. Pretty much every member of the cast asked her, and she absolutely refused to elaborate. I am assuming because she does not actually know. But it is worth noting that it could be used to destroy the universe, apparently, as stated by this. Anyway, she ends up doing a retelling of this adventure where she goes along with a sort of rich heiress and her partner, Keone, who is apparently a pseudo-important character throughout the rest of the franchise, and this is her first appearance. But so they go on investigating the space pirate, taking in the space pirate, and then finding out the deeper level of conspiracy based around a mad scientist who's trying to use the ultra energy matter to destroy the universe. Also, at one point, Mihoshi has an assistant who turned out to be a magical girl. Now, she tells this story utilizing the main cast members. So they basically get subbed in, and I assume the reason they did this is so it saves money on having to create character designs. Because what a lot of people don't really think about is every time you make a new character, you got to pay someone for that. So yeah, I assume they just used the old designs they already had, and I just imagine it's cheaper that way. But the in-universe reason, if I were to actually posit it, is that Mihoshi was very reluctant to tell this story in the first place, and she sort of got worn down into doing it. She's like, fine, I'll tell you. And I think the real sort of explanation is it's one of those like situations where she's doing it to protect people's identities, and she's skirting around giving away what is probably classified information about a past adventure. Regardless, what I do find interesting is that Mihoshi tells this story specifically to demonstrate her competence as a detective, and yet she doesn't really do much in this at all. Most of what ends up getting accomplished is actually done by her partner or the magical girl. Mihoshi's greatest contribution to this is probably the discovery of the mad scientist. But there is some debate about the canonicity of this OVA, and what I will say is that I think the title is really interesting, because it's not Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki, it's Tenchi Muyo, which is a title that is normally more associated with the Tenchi Universe continuity. However, Tenchi Universe hadn't existed yet. And so as far as I'm aware, this is maybe possibly canon to the main timeline, and that's sort of what I'm going with. This OVA is fine. It is very good that we're getting to see a bit more of an exploration of Mihoshi, since she is a bit of an underdeveloped character. But I will also say that I felt like nothing in it was too terribly standout. Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki second season is a series of 6 OVAs following the original OVA season, and the episodes in this season, in second season, are a bit more episodic than the original season 1. The first one involves Tenchi's cousin, I think it is, coming over, and he and the girls have to take care of this, like, newborn baby. And what this really ends up being is, towards the beginning, we get to see all of the girls sort of fuck up and be really bad caretakers for this kid. But what ends up happening is that Washu ends up stepping up, which I guess makes sense because she's the only one that's technically a mom, even though she's not like the most motherly of the characters. And this is really a Washu-focused episode. In fact, this is almost, I would argue, a Washu-focused season, but we'll get a little bit more into what this season goes over as we go on. Anyway, this is a really nice season, a nice episode that really helps establish more Washu as a character, which is important because she's definitely the least developed of all the girls at this point. Which leads into the second episode, where I'm just going to get to the finale of that one. We find out that Sasami has been dead the entire time, and it's actually the ship that is basically masquerading as her and has assumed her memories. And this is a really interesting episode because, first off, she has it's really dramatic and tense because she's forced to confront Ayaka with the fact that her sister's dead, and it manages to have this like underpinning tragedy that like really ramps up the sort of like melancholic vibe and the tension to it. And it's really interesting conflict between the characters. And I will say, Ayaka has been super chill about her sister being dead for so long. She's just like, whatever. It's a weird reaction, but it is a really interesting episode, actually. Episode 3 gives us a little bit more information on Ryoko's origin and how she came to be and how she came from Washu. And we get to see her father I say in quotation marks, which is basically a sort of like colonial organization that like responds to people's thoughts. I think they're called the Mass. And anyway, the basic result of this episode is that Ryo-Ohki ends up gaining a furry form where she can now turn into a girl. And they, I guess, are mostly using this to sort of cutify the mascot, I guess. I remember seeing Ryo-Ohki as a kid, and I thought it was really cute. But you looking at it as an adult, I'm not the biggest fan of this mascot. I think if they can develop Ryo-Ohki as a character, though, which now that it has a humanoid form, there's a bigger chance that that'll happen. I actually think this could be going somewhere interesting in future seasons. So, interested to see where this is going. Anyway, that brings us to episodes 4 and 5, which introduce us to an alien scientist. I probably don't need to see Alien and Tenchi Muyo anymore, who need to kidnap Washu because some extra-dimensional entity whose existence isn't in any way quantifiable and can't be proven to exist simply wants to have a conversation with her. And this is definitely one of the more important episodes because this sort of links up with episode 6 and the impending importance of the character of Washu. Anyway, so the scientist ends up swapping Ryoko with a robot with all of her memories and abilities, and it does not handle these nearly as soon as she does. And it ends up becoming very, very dere. And then at the end of these sets of 2 episodes, despite getting a little bit more information, which I think is elaborated on even more in episode 6, the main result of this is that the memories end up going back into Ryoko, and she's overall a lot like chiller and more swoony going forward, at least in this season. They might forget about it as early as possible convenience. Anyway, that results in episode 16, where we get to meet Agga and Sasami's mom, as well as Tenchi's great-grandmother, which makes it his grandfather's mom. And I would say that these are interesting characters to have arrived, but I would think that the conversations with Washu and Yoshio are actually even more interesting, which goes to show that the Jurai Empire is concerned about other civilizations, other groups acquiring as good a space travel technology as they have. And they are terrified of Washu creating more Ryo-Ohkis or more Ryokos, which would definitely cause them issues. And so where we're starting to establish in episodes 4, 5, and 6 of this OVA is a persistent power struggle over Washu's technology. And this doesn't go anywhere because this is the final episode of second season, but it does definitely point to where I can definitely see the series going. It also makes a very big point about Tenchi's wings of light, or whatever the fuck they're called. They're not called wings of light, but I don't remember what they're called. Tenchi's like magical superpowers are like a really big deal. And if what Washu's telling is the truth, Ryoko's stones that she has seem to have an unknown origin. So there's a lot of threads a lot of seeds that get planted in this season, and I'm interested in seeing where they'll be growing in the future. Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki second season picture drama is an anime I'm only bothering to review for the sake of completion, because otherwise basically nothing happens in this. It's like 7 minutes long, and it has a conversation between Washu and Mihoshi, basically just discussing Dr. Clay, who was the guy that swapped out Ryoko in the second season. They talk a bit about his care about this vase that Washu threatened him with, and it was revealed that Washu actually created it and that it's a forgery like 20,000 years ago. And we also see a conversation between the two entities that were interested in kidnapping Washu so that they could have a conversation with her. But I don't recall anything sticking out about the conversation, and I'm going to be honest, outside of the conversation having happened, I don't recall any detail about it. So, not the most complete and thorough review I've ever done, but I'm assuming if I don't remember anything about it, it's because it probably wasn't important, and I'm assuming it's probably not important because this is also a picture drama and not one of the official seasons. Weird fact about this picture drama, it was dubbed. Have you ever seen a dubbed picture drama? Crazy, right? Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki Season 3 is a lot less funny than the previous seasons, and I would say it's also a lot more involved in... See, every season of Tenchi introduces a whole bunch of new characters that show up for about one episode and then leave, and this one is super determined to do that. I think it does it more than even the previous OVAs, and it does push the story forward. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but it's almost a little too focused on that. And I feel like this season loses a lot of the charm that the original season had, especially because each season of Tenchi is basically 6 episodes. And the first episode of this one is, I feel like something happened and I think they set up for the final episode, but really it was just like a recap episode, which was helpful to me, kind of. Like, it wasn't even helpful to me. Like, I haven't seen a bunch of episodes of Tenchi for a while, and it did nothing for me, because they didn't bother to recap all of the plot with the, like, extra-dimensional entities or anything. It was just, like, scenes we already remember to reestablish the characters. So it wasn't even, like, a helpful recap. So episode 1 was kind of a waste. Then in episode 2... we're introduced to members of Tenchi's family we haven't seen before. Apparently, he has an older sister that sometimes pretends to be his mom, and he didn't know about this, so this is a new thing he's learned. And apparently, because the members of their, like, clan live for so long, sometimes they just fuck off to other planets so that people don't ask any questions, which is interesting. It means that Tenchi has a whole extended family that he just does not interact with until now. We do get to see his grandma. I might have called the lady in season 2 his grandma. I think she's technically his great-grandma, so let me just issue that correction. If I made that mistake, I don't actually functionally remember if I did or not. And they set up this mystery on how Tenchi's mom died, which is sort of interesting because I never even thought about it before, even if it had brought up, but they, like, really bring focus to this. And they're like, well, it's not time for you to find that out yet. And then we also find out that Tenchi's a great-great-grandma, so the mom of his great-grandma on his grandpa's side, is set up for him to marry this woman named, Ryo-Ohki? Ryo-Ohki? God, I don't know. She's in, like, almost every episode of this OVA, and my issue with her is that unlike basically all of the other girls of the series, she's, like, the most forgettable fucking character. Like, her personality is nagging mom, and that's all she's got, and it doesn't feel like a character that's adding anything to the narrative, because we already had Washu filling a motherly role, so it does feel wholly unnecessary, which is sort of a problem with season 3, is they just keep introducing characters, and these characters aren't doing anything. They're just showing up, and like, also we have this person. So, yeah, it is starting to become more of a... Anyway, this is basically an addition to the Tenchi harem. This basically adds I would argue, 4th person to the Tenchi love triangle. Technically, there's Washu and Mihoshi and Sasami, but I don't really consider them contenders on, like, Ryoko or Agga. So, considering this is, like, his fiance, and no one can apparently defy the great-great-grandma, Ryo-Ohki? I don't know. She's so forgettable. I don't know. Is a lot more of a contender, because if anything, she's now, like, catapulted to the lead, which brings a sort of level of camaraderie between Ryoko and Agga. The only interesting thing about her is that she might be evil. She did mention that she is there to stop Tenchi in case the women around him and him go, like, super militant, because they're basically an unstoppable army with just, like, the small number of people they have. And so she's basically there to take him down if anything goes wrong, which was why great-great-grandma sent her over in the first place. But also she was possessed by a dude named Z, who was created by 3 goddesses, who we'll get into in a second. And so he was watching through her eyes, and she has like evil smiles throughout the whole thing. And she was like manipulating things throughout the whole background of this. So she might actually be evil, but if she is like fully evil, the OVA doesn't explore that aspect right now. Another interesting thing is Mihoshi almost gets engaged to Tenchi in this one. And I still don't consider Mihoshi an actual credible romantic interest for Tenchi. They just do not have the chemistry that he has with Ryouko or Agga. But we do see Mihoshi's brother and dad, and Mihoshi's brother tries to start a fight with Earth, and Ryouko just like starts fucking bodying him. And he's got an interesting little plot line going on. I would say this is the best plot line of all of season 3, where he has a sort of like a Dom second in command who is like secretly into him, and there's a little romantic subplot between the two of them, and that's sort of a cute relationship. And also, what this does is it sort of implies something about Mihoshi, because there's at least 3 different sources that say but Mihoshi used to be a very good detective. She used to be very credible. She has a lot of cleared cases. And then at some point, she just like started to become a huge fucking ditzy fuck up. And there are shots where Mihoshi's brother's like, I can't let something bad happen to Mihoshi again. And then it flashes to this like scene where she looks like completely mind broken and chained up and injured. And there's like no sense of emotion on her face. Like she's like dead inside. And I wonder if there's almost an implication that like Mihoshi got captured and maybe like tortured or something in the past. And that's the moment when Mihoshi stopped being a great detective. Like Mihoshi's like ditzy, like fuck up persona might be a trauma response to an event that happened in the past. And I'm throwing this theory out while fully saying that seems too dark for Tenchi, because Tenchi's not a series that gets that dark. But I will say that this like dead expression in Mihoshi's face during these flashbacks that exist once or twice throughout this OVA is, if anything, maybe possibly the darkest like expression any character has had in this entire series. So it's possible that they're just hinting at it and they don't want to explore that. But there's almost an implication that something happened to Mihoshi in the past that was like really fucking bad. And my theory is this is why she went from being like a great detective to a complete ditz. This also reveals that extra-dimensional lady, which I was trying to avoid the word dimensional previously because the dimensions do not refer to what most people think they do. But it turns out that Tenchi is using dimension correctly. So yes, she's extra-dimensional and that she exists in more than 3 dimensions. And it turns out that so does Tsunami and so does Washu. And they're actually like 3 goddesses that created the universe because they were woke with knowledge that there exists an entity that is stronger than them or could be stronger than them. And so they've created the universe, the multiverse theoretically, to attempt to create an entity that surpasses them in power and intellect, even though they themselves believe themselves to have infinite power and intellect. Regardless, despite the fact that we're introduced to 3 goddesses that created the multiverse, we also know that like this other dude that they were talking to in season 2, this like, I don't know, like judge dude or whatever, he also appears to be one of these extra-dimensional gods. And also, briefly, when they almost destroy the 3rd dimension, we see like 12 other dudes, some of which look like dolphins, who might also be gods. And then at one point, the evil villain of the season, Z, who turns out to be an experiment to try and create this entity that's even stronger than the 3 goddesses, we see him have an ability that sort of nullifies the goddess's powers, and they refer to it as Mom. So there's definitely more than 3 gods in this series. But the gods in this series are like, fuck you, insanely super powerful. Point is, Washu is throwing her hat behind Tenchi. She's like, Tenchi's going to be the strongest out of everyone. And they say that becoming stronger than the goddesses is to ascend to the ultimate dimension. And so Tenchi almost ascends to the ultimate dimension in this season. And Washu's like, yeah, we can't let him do this. His mind isn't ready for it. He'll just like go insane and die or whatever. So they managed to stop that. So we do know a lot more about where the plot of Tenchi Muyo is going as of season 3. This does take the plot in a great step forward. The problem is it doesn't really have the charm of the other seasons. It's not as entertaining. There's not as much drama. We're not getting as much like love polygon really going on because they focus too much on this new girl. Noyoka, fucking, I'm gonna leave every fuck up of her name in. And then, because I think it really goes to show how forgettable this character is. And yeah, it's just like not as funny. And so overall, I do think that season 3 probably created one of the biggest strides in progressing the Tenchi storyline. But I also think it's probably the worst one so far. Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki third season picture drama is a series of little skitty vignettes that are mostly just there to give you a sort of like comedic shots that the third season was sort of lacking. I don't think any of them were particularly noteworthy or interesting as far as like the comedy value goes. I will say that this does contrast to the second season picture drama, which was a lot more story focused and sort of fleshed out the details they didn't get to during the second season OVAs. But the ones that really stuck out to me in this one was that there was a whole, I think the first one actually, was about the great-grandma of Tenchi sending over this like delicacy from one of their planets. And they look like moldy mandarin oranges. And Tenchi the whole time is like, I don't want to eat this, but everyone else is like, oh man, they're so good. And then Tenchi eats it, and it turns out to be good. And then he thinks there's like a leftover one at the end of the episode, and then he eats it, and it turned out to be an actually moldy mandarin orange. So that joke you could have seen coming from a mile away. And then there was another one where the entire episode was a reference to that Bruce Lee movie where he puts on the yellow bodysuit and then he like fights a bunch of people in a tower. But the joke is that it's like Ryo-Ohki and Sasami, and they are just like beasting through everyone without any issues. Oh, actually, you know what? There was a notable one. Because we do see a like Mihoshi giving a sort of report to her family, and it just gets progressively more depressing as she realizes how absolutely ditzy she is. But the important thing is we get to see who receives this report, and we get to see Mihoshi's mom. And I think that's probably the only notable thing that happens in this entire picture drama. Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki third season Final Confrontations is a one-episode OVA add-on to Season 3, where I think legitimately more stuff happens in this one episode than the entirety of the third season, because we get a resolution to what is basically all of the plot lines from Season 3 that ended up getting brought up. And in fact, it sort of functions similar to the Season 2 picture show in that regard. So we have the culprits of the attack on Earth from Season 3 getting their comeuppance, and Mihoshi's brother ends up marrying his Dom second in command. Lady Tokimi, who is the extra-dimensional entity whose name I keep forgetting, takes on a mortal form and is basically just now a member of the cast. She's just chilling out with the rest of the gang, rest of the crew now. We find out what happened to Tenchi's mom. Turns out she died of old age. Also, apparently, she was a huge prankster. Technically, there was a little bit of a character development with Tenchi where he sort of realizes that he ascribes a lot of feelings he had for Rhea, which is his dad's business partner, onto his mom, and his mom was actually a huge prankster, and he didn't really know her. But although the show does dwell on that, I don't see that that's going to become important going forward. We do get a little bit more with Noike, where we find out that she was left at an orphanage and she ended up having to arrest her mom, who turned out to be a right piece of shit. And so we do get a little bit more out of her, which is useful because her character is a little bit underdeveloped. We also do get a resolution to her being evil, where it turns out that she wasn't intentionally broadcasting the information to Z in Season 3. It was actually from the doctor from Season 2 that ended up causing that. And also she was getting possessed by the female form of Kagato, who was the main villain of the first season, who apparently was born as a hermaphrodite, but hated women so much that he split into a male and female half, and then the female half ended up possessing Noike, which is honestly the dumbest fucking thing that has ever happened in the entire series. Also, we have an adorable little montage where Tenchi's dad ends up marrying Rhea, who was his business partner / second in command in his business. So, yeah, more stuff happened in this one 30-minute episode than I think the entire third season. It's pretty good. It's also a lot funnier than the third season. So, yeah, I would say that this specific episode, this OVA, is a lot more in line with what I feel like Tenchi usually is and should be. And it does feel like a return to form for the series. Tenchi Muyo GXP is the Tenchi spinoff with the most connection so far to the rest of the Tenchi Muyo franchise, to the point where the main character, Seina, actually lives in the same town as Tenchi, and he is best friends with Tenchi's next-door neighbor. In fact, he's even mentioned throughout the series that he knows Tenchi personally and has interacted with the girls living at his house. So there is a direct... In fact, the cast of Tenchi Muyo actually shows up in GXP. And the GXP stands for Galaxy Police. Seina is a character who is incredibly unlucky to the point of absurdity, and he ends up having a Galaxy Police spaceship crash into him, basically. He does manage to survive, and he meets a Galaxy Police officer who assumes that he's friends with Tenchi, even though he only just kind of knows Tenchi, and ends up giving him an application to join the Galaxy Police, where, against his will, his family's sick of his bad luck breaking everything around their store and trying to get additional money to pay for for his younger sister, ends up basically selling him to the Galaxy Police, where he ends up on a Galaxy Police cruiser going through space. So we find out that the number one issue facing the Galaxy Police and the Jiraiya Empire, which is, of course, Tenchi's family, is an absolutely ridiculous amount of space piracy, just the craziest amount of space piracy. So while he's on his way to Galaxy Police Academy, they just let him punch in a random destination onto the ship's coordinates, and he ends up finding a whole bunch of space pirates, to the point where Seina becomes the person who is responsible for capturing the most space pirates in all of Galaxy Police history before he even officially starts his academy journey. And they don't say whose record he breaks, so I'm going to say, with absolutely no evidence to support this, that it was Mihoshi's record. They don't mention this at any point, but I'm going to say it's Mihoshi because we've seen 3 people independently confirm that Mihoshi was a great detective. I think someone even once said she was the best Galaxy Police detective, so I'm going to say it's Mihoshi, and I have nothing backing that. Anyway, Seina ends up breaking her record, and he ends up meeting his best friend's sister in Galaxy Police Academy, where he ends up getting trained by her and the police officer that crashed into him. Some stuff happens without getting into too many details, and his reputation continues to spread, and they end up giving him his own spaceship. But not just any spaceship. They actually give him a spaceship called Fuku, which was created by Washu, and is very similar, like it's basically the same design as Ryo-Ohki. It is worth noting that Tenchi Muyo GXP was actually created, I think, a year before Season 3 of Tenchi Muyo, but it is actually very clearly sent afterward because they reference events that happen in Season 3, and even so far as mentioning events that happen after the OVA of Season 3, like Tenchi's dad getting remarried, for example. So it's definitely after Season 3, despite having aired before it. Regardless, he ends up a space captain with one of the most advanced spaceships in the universe. And going a little bit further into the series, I'm not going to blow everything and go through each individual thing. He does end up getting into a sort of conspiracy with a space captain who's also a space pirate, but like one of the good space pirates, who turns out that she can shapeshift into an anthropomorphic dog. And frankly, I thought the show was just going to have an anthropomorphic dog in the harem. And I was like, you know what? That's weirdly refreshing. But no, she can shapeshift into a hot lady, whose name is also Ryoko. But and she also turns out to be a princess, because of course she does. But regardless of that, and also the like high priestess of Jirai ends up joining the harem also. There's a pretty sizable harem. I would actually say that Seina's harem is way better than developed than Tenchi's, but we will get to that in a second. Regardless, the show sets up a legendary myth, a prophecy, that one day a hero is going to show up with like a sword of light or some bullshit, and they're going to like defeat all of the space pirates. I think it's in relation to... I don't remember the original context for when they set this up, because it was so early in the series. But I believe it was in context to the dog people, that space pirate Ryoko. That does not help. We're going to call her a Balta. Ryoko Balta. that Balta's dog people were related to. I think the prophecy was related to them. And so later in the series, very late in the series, Seikishi crash lands on Dog Planet, and they assume that he's going to be the hero of legend because he's captured more space pirates than anyone. He literally becomes a space pirate catcher. Like, he ends up working for the Galaxy Police, and his primary job is to catch space pirates. So he's very accomplished at space pirate capturing, even at post capturing the most space pirates. And he ends up being brought to a sort of altar, a shrine, where a legendary weapon that only the hero can use is. And this weapon turns out to be a mech, but not just any mech. And this is the moment where my jaw literally dropped, and I was like, oh my god, these shows are more connected than I thought, because it is the same mech from Dual Parallel Adventure. Like, the very same mech from, I think, the first anime. If you're watching this in water form, go back to the start of this episode. So he ends up getting the Dual Parallel Adventure mech, and he uses that to take on the space pirates at the end. And he ends up making the Lighthawk wings, which I don't think I've mentioned in any of the other Tenchi reviews, because frankly, I don't think the show has done a great job of explaining what the fuck they are, other than like super powerful god manifestations of energy or some shit. But anyway, he ends up in this fucking god mech that ends up merging with Fuku, which is the Washu Ryo-Ohki sibling ship. And there's this great moment where I'm like, oh my god, finally, an anime where the evil villain subordinates are actually intelligent. Because we have the enemy admiral who's like working for the Galaxy Police. He's kind of a bit of a scumbag. And one of the space pirates ends up trying to flee. And Satan has fucking had it with this dude, so he goes to his mech and he fucking grabs it. And the ship is accelerating into hyperspace. And then he, in his fucking mech, rips the ship out of hyperspace. And the Admiral has, like, his guys around him. And the subordinates working for the Admiral are like, sir, he just ripped a ship out of hyperspace. That's physically impossible. And the Admiral's like, he can't do that. That's physically impossible. And the guys are like, sir, we just saw him rip a ship out of hyperspace. And the Admiral's like, I don't care about that. Attack anyway. And what happens is like second in command is like, okay, no, we're not doing that. And immediately surrenders. He just broadcasts a surrender immediately. And the Admiral's like, what are you doing? And his second in command is like, I'm saving your life. And then the ship actually arrests the Admiral and mutiny against him. Because they're like, this man can break the laws of physics on a whim. We're not going to fucking fight him. And I love that, because you never see the subordinates of, like, the main bad guy be like, no, absolutely fucking not. We are not even going to attempt to fight this guy. He is breaking the laws of physics. So, yeah, it's first off, it's a super fucking badass moment. Major characters in this are actually the Devil Princess of Jirai, who is introduced in the season 3. I guess she's introduced in this, technically. But she is in season 3 of Tenchi Muyo, and also is, Tenchi's great-grandma. And also we see Tenchi's grandma, they have way more screen time in this, and they have way more personality, to the point where I would say that the characters in this show, like the Tenchi characters related to Tenchi's family members have more screen time in this than they do in the actual Tenchi Muyo OVAs. Actually, I would say most people in this have more screen time than the Tenchi OVAs, but it is to the point where like, Tenchi's great-grandma has probably more screen time than, like, 90% of Tenchi's harem outside of Agga or Ryoko or maybe Washu. Definitely more screen time than Mihoshi, and she got a whole-ass OVA dedicated to her. Also, Mahoshi's mom is, a big character in this. She doesn't really do much, but she is a big character in this. Also, the guy that Tenchi defeated, like the pink-haired guy that Tenchi defeated in the season 2 of the show that I don't even remember if I mentioned in the review because he was like such a nothing character at the time, is like arguably one of the main antagonists of this. He's like a major force against Sena throughout the entire thing. And he sort of represents one of the elements that I really appreciate about Tenchi as a franchise, which is that it is a series that is not afraid to give side characters their own romantic subplot. So many series with romantic subplots only focus on the main character's romance lives, but like Tenchi's dad getting remarried, when the pink-haired guy ends up getting captured by pirates at some point, one of his captors is this sort of buff pirate lady, and when he ends up becoming one of the main antagonists, he ends up becoming like a pirate leader. She ends up becoming his second in command. Well, at the end of the series, he actually ends up proposing to her. And it is such a sweet little nice moment, especially for like Pirate Lady. I ended up really liking her character throughout this because she was always kind of like the chill character that had her head on her shoulders properly. Regardless, I would say that by and large, the Tenchi GXP cast is probably weaker than the absolutely best Tenchi Muyo characters in Ryoko and Ayaka. But I would say that by and large, the cast is better than every other Tenchi character that happens. And I would definitely say that Seina himself is definitely a character I prefer to Tenchi as protagonist, because Tenchi's sort of born into godhood. And don't get me wrong, he's definitely stronger than Seina. But Seina sort of, Tenchi's very passive. He's very hands-off, and he doesn't really engage actively too much with the people around him. He sort of hand waves all the women. Whereas Seina is a lot more earnest. He engages with the women. He even goes so far as to like buy them all presents at certain points. Like, Seina is a much more active character and an active protagonist, and Seina actively stumbles ass backward into his godhood. Again, not as strong as Tenchi, but his willingness to participate in the plot and interact with its characters makes him a lot more likable and easier to get behind. And unlike regular Tenchi, which only has 6 episodes, there are 26 episodes in GXP, which means I think there's already more episodes of this than there are in the actual Tenchi Muyo show, which means it's able to explore its characters better, but also Tenchi Muyo, Ryo-Ohki, likes to just introduce as many characters as it possibly can, and then it kind of does nothing with most of them, whereas GXP is more interested in telling a story than it is in just introducing characters. Not that it doesn't have a large cast, it does, but it is interested in telling the story and introducing its characters and exploring these characters to the point where they all kind of go places. And it is a pretty interesting story overall. There's a sort of a bit of a dip in the late teens of the episodes during the like Pirate Lord arc where they have like a ship named after poop, but it's not that bad, I will say. I didn't necessarily find myself growing bored. It was just not the highlight of the show itself. It's also a pretty damn funny show. One thing I would be remiss if I did not bring up is that the show ends with Seina basically being forced into a marriage with his 4 love interests. And there have been like 4 handmaids to the Devil Princess of Jirai, the great grandma of Tenchi, throughout the entire series. And then they like kidnap him at the end. And then the very last scene of the show, he's seen in his spaceship with all 8 women. So I almost wonder if he ended up marrying all 8 of them instead of the 4 main love interests. In which case, that's almost a weaker aspect of the show that he ended up with 8 wives instead of 4. I guess I will find out because I know GXP's story does continue way later down the line after like season 5 of Tenchi. But I did feel that was important to bring up. But Tenchi Muyo GXP, I would say, takes all of the best aspects of the Tenchi Muyo franchise and actually puts it together in a sort of coherent narrative and a sort of with a good mixture of like humor and actual narrative drama. And it really does sort of represent the absolute best parts that I have come to like from the Tenchi Muyo franchise. Tenchi Muyo War on Geminar is about Tenchi's little brother, Kenshi, who is apparently the daughter of, I want to say Rhea, which is Tenchi's dad's new wife. Supposedly, this actually takes place after Tenchi Season 5, but I didn't find that out until I was like halfway through this show. So I sort of watched this out of order, but you know what? It's probably not a big deal. The episodes there's only like 13 of them, but the episodes are double episode length at about 40 minutes, so this turns into what is effectively a 26 episode anime. But the choice to have double length episodes with half the episode length results in episodes that just drag the fuck on so much. Basically, Kenshi ends up getting sent to the planet of Geminar, which, if you remember, is also Sandy Planet from Photon. Except for this world is completely different, and the fact that it's Photon world is fucking absolutely pointless and does not serve any purpose. But we know it's the same one because there are mechs in the world that have been invented called oh god, like the riders are called sacred like mecha lords or some shit like that, and I don't remember what the mechs are called. sacred mechanoids is what they're called, which I'm only remembering because I'm literally staring at a synopsis and I saw it off the corner of my eye. And those are powered by Aho energy, which is the same source of energy that people had in Sandy Planet back in Photon. And the other thing we know is that Kenshi ends up getting picked up by what is essentially the villains of the series early on, shoved into a sacred mechanoid, and is forced to assassinate the Empress of this country, who the Empress's name, her last name, is Earth, which is the same last name that Photon had back in the show Photon. So one can assume that the Empire was created from the descendants of Photon and his hot wife. Regardless, they eventually, according to the changes a long time ago in ancient civilization, probably the original Photon civilization, created a bunch of sacred mechanoids, and then they used them for sports, and then it all went horribly wrong when they started basically creating soul gems. What essentially happened is they created a bunch of 40k fucking Eldar monstrosities, and that went horribly awry somehow. Can you fucking imagine? And like everyone died, and then civilization rebooted. I'm probably wrong in paraphrasing, but what you need to understand is this was done in a 20-minute exposition that I was struggling to keep track of what was being said, because first off, it was so long, and second off, it was so fucking boring. If I can get anything across, it is that War on Geminar is terrible and boring, and the characters in this, first off, it leans heavily into the harem aspect, and as I'm going further throughout the Tenchi series, I can definitely say that the harem aspect of all of these shows is continuously becoming the absolute worst aspect. Like, the decision that it needs to be a harem every time is actively damaging the products at this point. Even if they wanted to just say, like, okay, it's a harem, you gotta cut down the size of the harem because they don't have a large enough, well-developed enough cast to support this. I would say the real core members of the harem should be maybe the elf princess, fucking maybe, and maybe the white-haired girl. The white-haired girl's the only, I don't remember her name because I am struggling to remember a single character in this entire show. The characters are not good, they are not memorable, they are not worth diving into. I will dive a little bit into Kenshi, but that's about it. I liked the white-haired girl. I liked her sort of like dutiful and shy, but still forward personality. She was definitely the highlight of the show, and she was in less and less episodes as the show went on. And the elf princess was okay. The whole subplot with her getting engaged with Kenshi in an obstacle course was fucking terrible. But yeah, basically the show is predicated, God, the most annoying thing about this is at the end it's decided that all of the women in the entire show are gonna marry Kenshi and they all chase after him, and there's like fucking 300 women chasing after him, which means that Kenshi has the largest harem in all of the Tenchi Muyo franchise, and therefore has the worst harem in all of the Tenchi Muyo franchise, because as established with Seina, the smaller your harem, the more interesting the characters in the actual harem. And speaking of Seina, Kenshi has the least interesting personality of all of the main characters so far. And the way I would describe Kenshi is he is a mixture of Seina and Tenchi, but like only the bad parts of their personality that make them uninteresting characters. And so we have this character that's like a hyper worker that does all of the work, and he's like super dutiful, but he's just like the most bland fucking milquetoast dude ever. Like, I really cannot. The main gimmick is that he keeps digging up crystals, and then they do this dumb joke where one of the other girls is like, don't dig up crystals, and then she hits him. It is like mind-numbingly stupid and boring, and there is nothing to grab onto with Kenshi. He is like barely a fucking character. Like I said, there's probably a lot more I could say about War on Geminar because it is so fucking long, but like genuinely it is not worth the discussion I've already put into it, and it's not really worth further discussion. Like I said closer to the start of this review, if I can stress any single thing about Tenchi Muyo War on Geminar, it is that it is boring and terrible. Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki 4th season takes place about midway through Tenchi Muyo GXP, and the most of it, there's about 4 episodes. The first 3 episodes take place midway through GXP, and they also take place slightly after the season 3 OVA. I forget what the full title of that was, but it is largely about the lead up between the marriage between Tenchi's dad and Rhea. And during the season 3 OVA, you see that wedding, and that wedding is also briefly repeated in season 4. So it sort of takes place in between the season 3 OVA also. By which I mean the one episode OVA where everything happened, and not the OVAs which make up the entire third season. Regardless, they do reference GXP heavily in this, and a lot of this is like the setup to the wedding and the characters coming down and having a conversation with Rhea, who is revealed to have been from Geminar, which we kind of didn't, we sort of knew because it was implied in Geminar, and I watched Geminar for it first. But the big bulk of this season is to set up war on Geminar, and we learn that Rhea was sent from Geminar during the time when the Mechalords were fucking up everyone. And so apparently she wanted to have a child with a human and then send that into Geminar, that's her job, so that the kid can defeat the Mechalord, which is exactly what happened during War on Geminar. She sort of wants to not do that, kind of, because she's worried about her kid who is born in episode 4. Episode 4 takes place very far in the future compared to all of the other Tenchi stuff. But apparently there's like a switch where if she decides not to do it, she just dies. And so it's decided, no, they're going to have to send Kenshi into Geminar to solve all the problems. But yeah, apparently there's a timeline difference between Geminar and Earth. So that is part of the reason why she was from so far in the past back in Geminar. Regardless, outside of the Geminar discussion, honestly, this really is just a setup for War on Geminar. Like, this whole thing is like, okay, we need to justify War on Geminar, basically. But yeah, other than that, they do reference GXP heavily, and the thing about this is the point where Tenchi Muyo has crossed the threshold, and there is officially too many characters. Because when you get the full cast of all of the Dry royal family for this wedding, they kept mentioning characters, and it has gotten to the point where I now need to look up people's names, and I'll be like, oh, right, I remember that person, because the cast is officially too large to, like, viably track unless you're, like, a hardcore Tenchi fan. Like, there's at least 3 characters that appear in this show that are pretty important to the context of the show and their position in the family, and they get a good amount of screen time, and I genuinely don't know who the fuck they are. I genuinely do not remember these fucking people. Like, that is where we have gotten in Tenchi Muyo, and I don't feel like I need to, because as Tenchi Muyo has progressed from, like, season 2 onward, we're sort of getting into the point where the whole point of the show is just to introduce more women, and then in episode 4, the payoff is that you get to see them all naked. That is where we have gotten with it. There's not a lot going on. They have given up any semblance of a plot line. It is just ecchi harem shit now. I will say the best part of this is we've seen an evolution in Ryoko's relationship with Ayaka, where they are not antagonistic towards each other, and they sort of have more of a sisterly relationship for it. So they still bicker and bitch at each other, but it's not coming from a place of hostility anymore, and that is sort of genuinely the best part of this OVA. So yeah, it looks like the big goal that everyone is doing is the point is they're trying to train Kenshi up to be as powerful as possible for when he hits Geminar. And we already know how that goes, because I think that's the final part of the timeline outside of, like, GXP. Seina appears in this, and he doesn't have any of his bad luck accidents, but he continues to be the most interesting character in the series. So, yeah, Season 4 is mostly just to justify a bunch of bullshit, and at this point, I'm gonna say it, I think Tenchi Muyo has lost the fucking plot. Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki picks up from Season 4, where the basic premise of this season is that the characters are using whatever methods they can to train Kenshi to be as strong as possible for when he goes into Geminar. And that is really almost the entire bulk of it, honestly. There are some notable events that happen in this, which is that we do get to see adult Seina, and we are clarified that, although I think that happened in season 4 also, but we do clarify that he did marry the girls at the end of GXP, the other 8 women, and also he has another wife that came out of nowhere, and we will definitely, he might actually have 2 more wives that came out of nowhere. We will definitely talk about that because that is a persistent issue in season 5. But yeah, so that happened, and they imply he has a couple of kids, and they set up a zone on Earth. This might have happened in season 4, actually. Honestly, the problem is that the Tenchi series is devolving into such bullshit at this point, it's hard to track which season's what anymore. But yeah, basically, they're trying to set up a safety zone on Earth, but I think that was season 4, actually, now that I think about it. Maybe, I don't know, with a question mark. Anyway, so apparently Seina had some kids. I think the big part about this, I think the most important thing that happens in all of this is that Tenchi officially marries every single woman that lives with him. And some of those I don't feel great about. I still don't think he has really any chemistry with Mihoshi, and his relationship with Washu just does not make sense, or Sasami. Although I will say that Sasami and Ryo-Ohki have grown up a lot bigger. But really, he still only has chemistry with Ryoko and Agga, who, despite being the most developed characters in the whole franchise probably, have basically no screen time in the entire OVA, which very much reflects the fact that this is probably the worst of all of the Tenchi OVAs. It is genuinely dropping in quality ever since we left season 3. But regardless, he ends up marrying all of them, and there are scenes that imply that he had a child with Ryoko and Agga. And I don't think we know anything about these kids, but they kind of look like Ryoko and Agga, so I'm just assuming they're their kids because they don't look anything like any of the others. So I thought that was pretty notable. But yeah, other than this, yes, you know what, actually, this is the one where they try and set up a special Earth zone, because this is the one where they keep getting attacked by pirates, and they cut to scenes of Seina and Tenchi and this other dude just capturing a bunch of pirates and, defending all of their attacks, but, no one can stop them because they're Tenchi and Seina at this point. And so really, there's no tension in any of these scenes, and it's just about training up Kenshi. Anyway, they introduce this other guy who's apparently from the light novels, and he has a bunch of women with him also, who I don't think he's married to, but the idea is that he's going to be probably at some point anyway. And then it looks like Seina picked up 2 new wives that also happen in some light novel. And this is really the start of the point where, Tenchi has gone to complete shit at this point, because it's no longer enough to watch every single OVA, which I fucking have at this point. No, at this point, you also need to read a bunch of fucking light novels just to track the a million characters, and they're not doing anything with the characters. All they ever do is introduce more characters to marry the dudes. And they don't have any interest in developing those women. They don't have any interest in developing the men. It is just nonstop. Honestly, the worst part about Tenchi is the harem element. And the Tenchi marrying all of the girls in the cast really does feel like a huge fucking cop-out. Even if it was only Agga or Ryoko, it would make sense. I cannot overstate how much it would only make sense for him to marry those 2, because his relationship with the others is, and I guess that's why he only had kids with them, but the relationship with the others is just not there, and it doesn't make any sense. But yeah, the insistence on having a harem element to the series actually is actively degrading the quality of the series. And I knew it was a harem when I came into this series. I knew what I signed up to when I got into the Tenchi franchise. But yeah, I've seen harem be handled a lot better, and it is sort of degrading and lowering the value of the product overall. Anyway, the fact that they keep introducing new characters, and this is just about training Kenshi, and there's no tension, and only 3 things happen in the entire thing, it really does, it's so boring, is the number one issue. The one thing I will say about this is there is a scene where they send Kenshi to Geminar, and Rhea just breaks down in utter devastation and tears. That scene is pretty powerful. It's a very strong scene, but that scene in and of itself is not enough to support a 6-episode OVA series, which is a sequel to another 4-episode OVA series, both of which were incredibly boring. So, yeah, there's still one mainline Tenchi anime left with Paradise starring, or whatever the fuck, the GXP sequel. But I have very low hopes for any Tenchi series post-Geminar. Tenchi Muyo GXP Paradise starting contrasts its original season, which was the best of the Tenchi Muyo products so far, by being the absolute worst season of Tenchi Muyo. Like, I'm not fucking with you when I say that this almost hit a 3 out of 10. This is, like, nearly unbearable to watch. Basically, this takes place during the foundation of Tabletop Island and, I guess Paradise is what they've decided to call it, which is the region in the Earth where they're planning to basically set up Earth as its sort of going forward its own intergalactic entity where it has its own political center, so it doesn't get interfered with by things like the pirates or other alien civilizations. This is all from Tenchi Muyo Season 5. I don't know if I talked about it, but that's what Tenchi Muyo Season 5 was, other than training Kenshi. And from this side, we basically focus on Seina, but, like, even then, Seina is, like, barely a character in this. Like, the good-natured bad luck magnet that he was is basically gone. We only have one bad luck scene in this entire thing. His wives pretty much never appear. It's just, like, a bunch of side characters that are apparently, I guess, maybe also married to him, but, like, genuinely, who fucking cares? We have the robot from Dual Parallel Adventures. She's back in it. She's mentioned that there was a parallel version of Earth in the past, and that there are people around her that remind her of the parallel versions. So we're getting a little bit of a callback back to Dual, so it's still relevant, I suppose, although her character doesn't really do much in this at all. There is an entire episode dedicated to one of the new Seina wives, who, as it turns out, got hit by a train while buying a bunch of porn dojin, and ended up getting reincarnated into a fantasy world, and then has somehow ended up in Earth back again, but it's like the same Earth that she died in, and so she visits her hometown, and she ends up reconnecting with her old friends and her mom, who's like, a good amount of time has passed. Like, all of her, like, old friends are, like, adults now. So that was interesting. It is quite literally, and I am not making this up, the most interesting thing that happens in the entire OVA, which is, like, I don't know, like episode 3 or some shit like that. Everything else is absolutely terrible. Just absolutely terrible. The number one focus of this is Kiriko's mom. Kiriko, of course, being from the original GXP, being one of Seina's wives. Her mom is like a major character in this, and they just outright state that there was a good chance that if Seina hadn't gotten picked up by the GXP on a pure fluke, she was going to end up marrying him, which is a fucking wild thing to say out of nowhere. And then it's implied that they fucked, and yeah, this whole thing just focuses on her relationship with Seina, where all of the adult women are like, hey, you know this boy that you sort of helped raise? You should fuck him and marry him. And it's weird, all right? Like, am I wrong in thinking it's really weird to try and pursue a sexual relationship with a kid you tried to raise? That feels really fucking weird to me. Like, honestly, it is textbook grooming. I hate throwing around the word, but, like, that is what it is. Like, Seina was groomed, and clearly this is someone on the production team's fetish, but, like, it is fucking weird, and it, like, never properly gets addressed. Anyway, this whole thing focuses on her character, and apparently, at some point, Seina went to the magical world where the Isekai girl ended up getting sent to, and there, if you spend enough time there, you develop a magic-using organ. So they take Kiriko's mom, they put her there, she develops a magic-using organ, and then she turns into a total Mary Sue, where now she's like the greatest magic user ever, and she can like create astral body clones, and she can like manipulate her own memories and split her consciousness, and she can construct whole-ass mansions, and it really does devolve her character going forward, because one, now we know she's a huge fucking groomer, And 2, now she's just like such a fucking little Mary Sue where everyone is encouraging her despite what I would argue is very bad behavior. And she's like overpowered and everyone likes her. And then there's like a bunch of pirates that show up and they're like, we couldn't even touch her. It is terrible. It's like terrible on every level. This is absolutely the worst Tenchi OVA I have ever seen. And I really do hope this is as bad as it gets. Because I'm being straight with you right now. I wish Tenchi Muyo, the series, not the character, I wish Tenchi Muyo had died in Season 3. I wish Season 3 was the end of the franchise. Because what they have done since Season 3 is like watching a fucking slow-motion train wreck. Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki Heianmuyo picture drama is a 10-minute OVA that was released on Laserdisc in 1993 and is super obscure and super hard to find. You might ask how I managed to watch it, and the answer is, it was actually a lot easier than I expected it to be. Basically, what this is about is, well, hold on. Now, full disclosure, before I do a review of this, I understood roughly half of what was happening in this. Because as you might imagine, this was not in English at all, and it was not subtitled. So, you're going to get my review of my impression of what this was about. So, what this seems to be about is Agga is a princess in this, and she has a thing for Tenchi, who is a samurai, and Tenchi and Mihoshi are off on a quest to kill a demon out in front of the Raishimon gates. While this is happening, Agga is being accosted, courted, perhaps, by Tenchi's grandpa, who wants to, get with her romantically, wants to marry her, basically. And so she gives him the quests from the Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, find the robe of the fire rat, get a branch from the from like the Hori elixir, get the Buddha's bowl. I forget the exact fucking things, if I'm being honest. Look, my Tokitori shit's a little rusty at this point, but those are the basic ideas. Anyway, there's a bit of a humorous little gag where it turns out he saw all of that coming and he already did it. He already got them all. He has them all. So now she can marry him. And she's like, oh, fuck. I wasn't seeing this coming. I'm still not going to marry you. And anyway, meanwhile, Mihoshi and Tenchi find Ryo-Ohki, who is injured. I think she got attacked. And so Tenchi ends up helping Ryo-Ohki, and then Ryoko shows up, and she's like, oh, hey, thanks for helping Ryo-Ohki. And then it turns out that Ryoko is actually the demon they're there to take down. And she's grateful to Tenchi, and she ends up getting a thing for him, so she fucking kidnaps him and, feeds him and, gives him snacks and shit like that. Well, Mihoshi ends up going back to Agga and is like, hey, Tenchi got kidnapped. Who the fuck knows what's happening with that? And Ayaka's like, oh no, I've got to do something. And she charges into Ryoko's castle and she breaks down the door, and then they start arguing, and then I'm pretty sure the OVA ends before we get any resolution to anything. And that's Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki Heianmuyo picture drama. It is so clearly not canon, and we have very clearly entered the portion of the Tenchi Muyo series where we are just watching stuff that is just objectively not linked to the mainline series anymore. As for what I thought of this, it was okay. I would say that the thing that I found, keep in mind this is a picture drama, so there's no animation or anything. So I would say that what I appreciate the most about this is the gag where Tenchi's grandpa already got the Princess Kaguya items. I thought that was pretty clever, but other than that, it is pretty much just your standard fan service. I guess it's not, I mean fan service in the way that it's clearly made for fans and not that there's a lot of nudity in it. So clearly fan service OVA picture drama with not much special going on. Tenchi Muyo Tenchi Universe is what would happen if the Tenchi Muyo OVAs actually followed my advice and toned down the harem elements and actually bothered to tell a real story. basically, it starts off with Ryoko crash landing on Earth because she's not sealed inside of a cave in this. In fact, Washu is sealed inside of a cave in this. And then she is pursued by Mihoshi and Mahoshi's partner, who we originally saw back in the Mihoshi OVA. Now, I don't know if this takes place in the same universe as the original Mihoshi OVA, which I always suspected took place in mainline Tenchi universe, because this is the only universe where we have seen Mihoshi's partner, because she isn't in the other OVAs, but she might appear in some of the light novels or something, because honestly, it's reaching a point where the Tenchi OVAs are barely canon anyway to themselves, so who fucking knows. So this may or may not be the same universe as the Mihoshi OVA, but I'm going to say that that was probably main timeline. Anyway, doesn't matter that much. Point is, Ayaka also shows up. She has some past beef with Ryoko where they kept encountering each other as kids, and it's not elaborated on why they encountered each other so often and what their history is, but also basically everything that is canon in the OVAs seems to be canon in this also, with the primary exception that Washu is, at least as far as this show's concerned, never mentioned to be Ryoko's mom. Also, Ryoko might not be able to turn into a spaceship in this. So it's mostly the same thing. Tenchi's still the inheritor of Jirai. His grandpa still abandoned the kingdom. They're not like, it's not implied that he's like Ayaka's like cousin brother lover like it is in the original ones. If anything, the Tenchi universe series just sort of took everything that was stupid about the original OVAs and it just fucking fixed them. More to the point, in the OVAs, the only real love interests that are treated as credible to Tenchi are Ryoko and Ayaka. And, also, Sasami doesn't seem to be dead in this universe, and there's no real implication that Washu and Tsunami are actually gods, and also we don't see Tsunami at all. So, yeah, I guess those are major changes, that Washu is just a sort of scientist. She's probably not Ryoko's mom. And then everything else is basically normal. It actually comes into a lot more put together, incredible product, and you don't have to track 8,000 blood relations for no fucking reason for characters that appear for the briefest amount of time and add nothing to the story, just so it can get really into a political plot with absolutely no stakes. This doesn't do that, is what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this does not do that. In fact, this actually sort of turns into a bit of an adventure series, where the basic idea is that Ayaka ends up getting framed for something. I'm not fully sure, but being a traitor, I think. And it's because the guy ends up taking the Jirai throne by pretending to be Tenchi's grandpa and makes basically the whole group, the whole main cast, ends up becoming enemies of Jirai, and they end up having to go on the run. And that's a good half of the show dedicated to that. The early parts really just establish the characters and do some comedic scenes. It's very strong Tenchi, very similar to like early 90s Tenchi, which this is 90s Tenchi. So the very early episodes give you like good classic OVA vibes and a more functional serial narrative before turning into an adventure series a la GXP. Although I will say that GXP's adventure narrative is probably better, but Universe has the benefit of utilizing characters we're already familiar with and being able to place them in new and interesting situations that we don't get to see in the original mainline universe. There's also a notable series of 3 episodes that don't really have any impact on anything, where Washu creates a device that lets you change the universe to your desires, and they end up using this as a sort of, reverse cameo, where the characters go into different universes that are, let's say, inspired by other Tenchi spin-offs. So, for example, Ayaka's universe is very similar to the Heianmuyo universe, where she and Tenchi have a bit of a love affair, and Tenchi and Mihoshi are charged with defeating Ryoko. But I do not believe that this is the same as the Heianmuyo universe. I think it's just an inspiration, not just because I believe this anime came out 4 years after that Laserdisc, but also because the events in this imply that Ayaka and Ryoko don't know each other, I believe, or they do know each other, I forget, but regardless, it does contradict the events of the original Laserdisc. Look, that thing was 10 minutes long, I barely remember it. Also, they go into the Pretty Sammy universe. I'm not sure which one, because there's fucking 3 or 4 of them at this point, There's a new anime coming out. It's not out yet. I'm not sure if it's a new universe or not. So there's 3 to 4 of the Pretty Sammy universes, so it's not clear which one it is. Based on the time period, I think this is probably a reference to what would be, I think at that point, the upcoming 3-episode OVA series that I haven't seen yet, or a reference to the appearance in the original Mihoshi series. But the point is that ends up with Ryoko and Ayaka kissing. So that's kind of fun, I suppose. There's also a universe that I don't think is a Tenchi spinoff, but it might be, and I'm just unaware of it, where Ryoko and Tenchi are like gangsters. So that's actually kind of fun. Oh, there's also a universe where Tenchi is married to Mihoshi, and that doesn't really go anywhere. So yeah, there's a lot of like series of fun episodes, and the main benefit for this is, one, it's a Tenchi series with an actual plot that it bothers to explore, and we get the characters together, and it only focuses the romantic angles on the actual credible romantic candidates rather than deciding that this is a universal harem where Tenchi is apparently fucking literally every woman in his entire life. So basically, it fixes every fucking problem with the original Tenchi series while also interacting with the characters you should already care about, while also telling an actual genuine narrative and story. So basically, this is what would happen if the creators of the Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki OVAs actually gave a shit. Tenchi Muyo in Love is a sequel movie to the Tenchi Muyo universe anime, although it has basically nothing to do with the original plot of that anime. Basically, a prisoner of the Galaxy Police named Kane breaks out of prison and he travels back in time to kill Tenchi's mom. Now, worth noting that this mom is portrayed completely different than the mom in the mainline Tenchi universe, in that this is basically just a regular sort of like high school girl that sort of has dry powers. Whereas, obviously, you know, in the main continuity, Tenchi's mom like died of old age and was like super energetic. So completely different vibe, completely different character portrayal, which is really the only indication that this takes place in the Tenchi Muyo universe continuity, in that this doesn't really have anything to do with the events of that show. Regardless, they end up creating a device, Washu creates a device, that prevents Tenchi from basically being erased from existence, and then they travel back in time to find out what is basically trying to kill Tenchi's mom and to basically protect her from Kane. And this ends up in like a big exciting fight scene, and then we find out that the reason Tenchi's mom died in this continuity is because she expended all of her energy trying to keep Tenchi alive and when she was fighting Kane. So, honestly, a sort of a better reason for her to have died than in the main continuity where she just dies of old age. I think this is a lot more satisfying. This is, just like Universe, takes itself a lot more serious than the original one, and so there's less moments of comedy. A good amount of this is actually Ryoko and Ayaka bickering, but it is an okay enough movie. I think there's things to appreciate about it. It's sort of nice to see the girls start bonding with Tenchi's mom over time, but there's also a Galaxy Police operative who shows up and like gets the drop on Ryoko, and then he just sort of dies, and like that doesn't go anywhere. If I had a complaint about this movie, and this is very uncommon for me to make this complaint, I would actually say I think this movie is too short. I feel like it would have served itself better by exploring its premise and its characters a bit more, because I think it's only, an hour and a half? Hour 34, yeah, so not very long at all. And I think it actually taking the time to, maybe give more time with Tenchi's mom, maybe have at least a better interaction between Tenchi and his mom. I wouldn't have been upset if we got more information about Kane, because we know he was like sealed away by the Dry Royal family. We could have learned more about that, I think. I think we just needed more. Oh, a good portion about this is Tenchi's dad, who's been rewritten in the universe continuity, and his relationship with Tenchi's mom, and we get little scenes of that, which are often sort of interrupted by Ryoko and Ayaka, and more of that also could have been better. So the movie was enjoyable enough, but there just wasn't enough of it, and it didn't come out to a fully satisfying experience. Tenchi Forever is the second of the Tenchi universe movies, and is probably one of the best pieces of Tenchi content so far. Basically, Tenchi ends up getting absorbed into a parallel world by his grandpa's ex-lover who is not his grandma. Also worth noting that his grandma is officially confirmed to be a different person than she is in the main continuity, which is okay with me. Regardless, he gets sucked into this parallel world and ends up living with her in this sort of like apartment where he's a painter and she's got something else going on that I don't fully remember. And they basically live there in isolation because she's trying to live the life that she never got to with his grandpa. The main focus of this story is Ryoko and Ayaka looking for Tenchi. And this entire movie is almost exclusively dedicated to their interactions with each other as they actually evolve into, before it was always like unclear what their relationship was. You know, they always had a sort of frenemies vibe. They're just straight up friends in this at the end. And there's even a brilliant moment towards the end where Ayaka admits that Ryoko is the only one that can bring Tenchi back from the other world because he has more of an emotional attachment to her, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the closest we're ever going to get to a Ryoko confirmation as far as Tenchi goes. I know the main continuity went full harem, and it seems like he had a kid with both of them, but Ryoko really does make more sense in just about every continuity, although I think you could make more of an argument for Ayaka in this one, just because he ends up abandoning Ryoko for Ayaka at the end of the original Tenchi Universe anime. Does not matter. Point is, seeing the interactions between these characters and the bonding between these two girls as they try to save Tenchi from the situation, all while they slowly try to emotionally appeal to him. It's pathos on pathos on pathos. It's actually a really good watch. Magical Girl Pretty Sammy, the OVA, not the TV series that came out very shortly after, or not to be confused with the same character that appeared in the Mihoshi special, this is a different timeline, this is a different continuity, because I'm pretty sure the Mihoshi special is main continuity, and this is its own separate, isolated continuity from the same named TV series, and also, this is a separate continuity from the Magical Girl Club, which we'll talk about, I guess, later in this episode, or in a few weeks from now, if these have been re-uploaded. But also, this is probably a different character in continuity from the Magical Girl Pretty Sammy that appeared in Tenchi Muyo universe, which, regardless, here's what this is about. This is about Tsunami, who is from a sort of magical world, being selected to be the next queen of that world. But in order to become queen, she needs to pass a royal test, and she needs someone to do the test for her. So she gives magical powers to Sasami, who in this universe is the younger sister of Tenchi, and also they have a mom who sings karaoke, and she is the best character in the entire show, and the only good scenes are the scenes where the mom is singing karaoke. I'm not kidding. This is actually kind of terrible. Anyway, and Tenchi is being beset by Ryoko and Ayaka, who are girls that go to his school, and they keep trying to seduce him. And that's as far as any of that actually goes. Also, Washu shows up and she becomes a teacher at their school. Also, Mihoshi and her partner, Natsuki Kioni, I think Kioni is her name, are employees of Tenchi and Sasami's mom who work in the musical store that they run. Regardless, what happens is that Tsunami gives Ryo-Ohki, who is the sort of magical girl mascot character in this, to Sasami to turn her into Magical Girl Pretty Sammy. And the idea is, I don't know, and I don't remember. I feel like they said, but I actually don't remember what the test really is. It's something to do with like true love or some shit, I think, because at one point, because there's a rival to Tsunami who shows up, and the rival to Tsunami turns Sasami's best friend into a magical girl called Pixie Misa. And Pixie Misa uses her powers to transform Ryoko and Ayaka into monsters. And at the end of that episode, they said that Sasami was correct and that Tenchi and Ayaka and Ryoko weren't ready to move along with the relationship yet. So It's something to do with love. It has something to do with love. I'm not totally sure. Worth mentioning that the best friend character in this, I've not seen in any of the other Tenchi series. And the mom in this is not actually Tenchi's mom in either the Tenchi Universe series or in the mainline series. This is another mom. This is probably my favorite of his moms, if we're being honest with ourselves. Anyway, in the second episode, the villain gives a software engineer the ability to standardize the world, and in his brain, that means crashing the moon into the planet. And then in the third one, a comet crashes, and then aliens show up, and then people get possessed by aliens, and then they fight. The OVAs do not go anywhere, honestly. There's nothing really notable about them. They don't go anywhere. It kind of feels like a fucking complete waste of time. And to the point where, when I was thinking about what I would say for this review, I realized that I don't think this ends properly. I think at the end of episode 3, we don't see Tsunami on the throne or anything. I think Pretty Sammy's still undergoing the test, so there's no real ending or definitive conclusion, and I believe Pixie Misa runs off and is like, I'll get you next time, Pretty Sammy. So yeah, it's a complete and utter waste of time. Magical Project S, or Mahou Shoujo Pretty Sammy TV, is the sort of televised adaptation of the Pretty Sammy series, which is pretty different from the original OVA. In this series, for example, it's still the same basic plot of Tsunami going to become queen of Jiraihelm or some shit, I think, and the other option trying to stop her. Although in this one, there is the, I would say, main antagonist, and then there's also a character named, like, Romeo or some shit. It's basically, it is literally Ayaka, but they changed her name. They did that to a lot of characters in this. For example, Ryoko shows up in this, and she is also named something else, and I couldn't fucking tell you what her name is either. Tenchi's also in this. He's just a guy who directs children's shows. But anyway, we'll get more onto that. Anyway, yeah, so basically what happens is Sasami needs to become Pretty Sammy as a magical girl in order to pass the test and be virtuous so Tsunami can end up becoming queen. So they changed her family relations from the OVA. Like I said, Tenchi is no longer her older brother in this. He now is the character that appears in one episode that Sasami ends up getting a crush on, where he basically directs a Super Sentai series. And Mihoshi is still her teacher. And actually, Mihoshi used to just work in the OVA in the record store that Sasami's family owns. So now she's her teacher. And also Kione is in the show as a different teacher to a different class that also shows up pretty frequently. Ryo-Ohki is in this as the magical familiar / advisor to Sasami. Ryo-Ohki in this is a boy, which is fucking weird. And they changed Sasami's parents from the OVA. Now, weird fact, the mom who is obsessed with singing karaoke, who I called the best character in the OVA, is still in the show. She cameos in one episode where she ends up becoming a villain. And the choice to have her still in the show, the best character of the OVA, but not make her Sasami's mom, is fucking wild, especially because the replacements to Sasami's parents, Sasami's mom in this, is super uninteresting. They have a running gag with the dad where he does like 100 different careers and he's implied to be like super cool. But honestly, her parents in this are, I would argue, much less interesting than they were in the OVA. Another prevalent issue that this has is the fact that the characters that the show focuses on, the ones you're supposed to be rooting for, are usually the least interesting, less qualified characters. So Sasami is basically a reluctant hero that thinks being a magical girl is embarrassing, and that is pretty much the only thing she has going for her as a character. Whereas Tsunami is essentially, she wants to become queen so she can plant flowers everywhere. And then when we get to the opening scene and we see the primary antagonist, Ramia is what I am looking at this synopsis. When we get Ramia, she like shows up and she's like, I've got a tax plan. I know what I'm doing with the citizenry. Here's my deportation policy. And then it cuts to Tsunami and it's like, I'm gonna plant flowers. And then they're like, we're gonna make Tsunami become queen. And it's like, Tsunami has no business being the queen. And she is, in this show at very least, portrayed as being utterly incompetent compared to Ramia. Oh, and it is worth noting that Ramia creates Pixie Misa again from Sasami's best friend, Misao, who we will talk about in a second, but I will, just to cut in real quick, Misao is by far more interesting and a better character than Sasami. So we get this scenario where the characters you're supposed to be rooting for are like the worst characters. Like, they're worse options than the villains, and so it ends up hard to cheer for them. This is also a very gag-based show. It's heavily episodic. There's a lot of gags, but the problem is that the gags aren't actually funny. So you end up with this just general state of every joke in the show is some sort of eye-rolling joke. I actually had some gags that I could bring up, but I don't see the point because, frankly, it's basically every gag in the entire series. I will briefly talk about the best friend Misao, who turns into Pixie Misa, which is a representation of Misao's jealousy towards her best friend, towards Sammy, for having an actual functioning home life. Because Misao's whole gimmick is she's basically neglected by her parents, and she's bullied by her classmates, and she's just generally treated poorly by the people around her. And so the sort of resentfulness and jealousy ends up building up in her, which turns into Pixie Misa. And it creates this scenario where Pixie Misa is actually, and she has this whole fucking arc where she learns to accept herself, and at the end, Pixie Misa actually ends up helping Sasami against what turns out to be the final villain, which I'm not calling her the main antagonist because she was only a villain for like 5 episodes, which is basically Ayeka. Ayeka ends up being sort of the final villain, even though Ramia spends more time as the actual villain. The problem is they have to pivot to Ayeka being like a super villain because Ramia is too sympathetic and too interesting to close out the entire series, and they finish up her arc a little too early, so they needed to swap to Ayeka just being straight fucking evil. But anyway, we end up in a scenario where we're focusing narratively on Sasami and on Tsunami, but we end up in a scenario where Ramia is more competent and is a better suit to be the Queen of Dry Helm, and Misao is a more interesting character. And honestly, seeing the perspective of a magical girl, of a protagonist who his transformation is basically the epitome of their resentfulness and their shame and their guilt and their loneliness and their jealousy. Transforming into that and seeing that character come into her own would have made for a more interesting story. And so I think the biggest crime about Magical Project S, other than being absolutely unfunny, horribly insufferable, focusing on all the wrong characters, and being completely uninteresting, is actually, I skipped over the part that's the real problem. I think the problem is it focused on the wrong characters, and we're following the wrong characters. And I think the ultimate problem of Magical Project S is Misao and Ramia should have been the leads, and this would have been a better series if it had absolutely nothing to do with Tenchi Muyo. Magical Project S Specials is a series of 7 vignettes related to the Magical Project S series. There are basically just like Family Guy cutaway gags, each one lasting approximately 3 minutes, and they don't really have any greater impact on the narrative. I know one of them was giving a tour of Sasami's house. I remember the last one very vividly was like this sort of like overly grandiose, epic summer blockbuster-esque movie trailer for the Pretty Sammy movie trailer. Pretty Sammy movie. They don't make a Pretty Sammy movie. The whole thing is a gag. I know that one of them was a murder mystery where Sasami was supposed to be killed, and Emmy, who was a magical girl I didn't even bother bringing up in the original review, and the other girl who was also briefly a magical girl have a debate, and then you never find out who killed Sasami, and then That starts off with a sort of Cinderella story where at the end, I think it's Misao actually in that one. Misao she ends up married to the prince, but then he just lives off her labor, and then she ends up miserable at the end also. And there are also, there's also one where, what's her name? Rihanna? That sounds fucking wrong. The synopsis I'm staring at does not say her name. Anyway, the rival to Tsunami. It tries to kill Tsunami for an entire episode and also transforms into a magical girl, which also happened in the original show. I just didn't bother bringing it up because it wasn't relevant. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make about this is none of them were particularly interesting or memorable because I don't think I just told you 7 different vignettes. So I definitely forgot some of them, and I would argue that those are the most of the forgettable ones. But regardless, the only reason I am even bothering to make a review about these is because I feel obligated to do that in that I've made a review about every other Tenchi Muyo product so far. So I feel like I have to, but otherwise there is genuinely nothing notable about this. Tenchi the Movie 2, Daughter of Darkness, or more accurately Tenchi Muyo Midsummer's Eve, is based off of the 10th Naoko Hasegawa light novel, which is a series of, I believe, 13 light novels that are apparently so obscure they're not even listed on Mahou. And the only reason I know anything at all about them is when I was researching this episode of WIWR, I read about them on the Tenchi Muyo wiki, and also I know that I think all of them have been fan translated. I think they semi-recently finished the last one. Didn't read them, didn't care, but the point is, these are so obscure that no one gives a shit. Now, from what I understand, and I'm a bit paraphrasing on the history here, so take this part with a grain of salt. They decided to make a series of 3 Tenchi Muyo movies, and I believe this is the second one, and one of the other ones was, I think, one of the Tenchi Universe movies. What the last one is, I don't fucking remember. It doesn't matter. But anyway, during that time period, they were doing a bit of a Tenchi marathon. So what the Naoko Hasegawa light novels do, from what I have heard, is they they follow the series, the original series, the mainline continuity, up until season 2, and then they don't go to season 3, they spin off and do their own thing. Notably in this movie, Kyone's in this, and she isn't in the first 2 seasons, but it's also worth noting that because this splits off of season 2, and this is the 10th movie, it's the 10th novel, there's 9 other novels before this, although from what I've read on the wiki, they're not in chronological order. So, who fucking knows? All I know is that Kiyone is, weirdly enough, never in the mainline continuity, which does make me wonder if the Mihoshi thing is actually mainline, or because that would be her only appearance. But regardless, basically the idea of this movie is Tenchi's grandpa at some point dealt with some sort of dream imp. It's, for all intents and purposes, it's Mr. Mxyzptlk. It's just the Superman villain. Except I believe this one is female. And what happened is the Jirai soldiers took away the imp, which had a name, but I don't fucking remember, who cares. Took it away when they were kids, and he got really pissed off at Tenchi's grandpa. So he decides he's gonna fuck with Tenchi. And so he takes one of Tenchi's hairs. I'm saying he. Again, I think the imp is female, and I don't know why I keep saying this. Takes one of Tenchi's hairs and one of her hairs and creates a clone of them, like a clone of both of them. And then, because their realm, I assume, they don't get into the details, so I'm hypothesizing a little bit, but because their realm exists outside of time, they aged up the child of this, Tenchi's daughter, to the future, then brought Tenchi's future daughter to the past to encounter Tenchi, while also mind-controlling Tenchi's daughter, so that Tenchi's daughter can bring Tenchi to the imp girl. But the weirdest part about this is the method of mind control used is that Tenchi's daughter is just super sexually attracted to him. She kisses on him. There's one scene where she's licking his face. When he's sleeping, she pulls up his shirt and starts licking his chest. It's weirdly sexual. And the craziest part about this is honestly, I think if she was just an incestuous daughter, it would be less weird. The fact that the main villain is like, not only am I going to create a clone of my former friend's grandson, and I'm going to use my DNA for it, I'm also going to make his daughter sexually attracted to him so that when she is licking him, that will bring him to me. Like, she didn't have to do that part of the plan. The fact that it's not just incest is, if anything, weirder. It would be more normal if it was incest. The fact that the mind control plot is what causes the sexual attraction to Tenchi is where it gets fucking weird as shit. Anyway, the big issue with this movie is that Ryoko, and to a lesser extent Agga, are jealous of the future Tenchi daughter, and there's a major conflict between Ryoko and the daughter in this. At one point, they find a silver hair in the daughter's head, and it's like, who could possibly be the mom? And I'm like, is it Ryoko? Because it would make sense if it's Ryoko. Are we getting a Ryoko confirmation? Any Tenchi universe that doesn't confirm Ryoko as the canon love interest is wrong. Unless it confirms Agga, in which case, I get it. But anyway, doesn't end up happening. It's the whole imp thing I already told you about. Anyway, the movie itself, and then I guess because I'm spoiling it, because fuck you, you're not going to watch this, is that at the end, they end up bringing her back as a baby, but presumably not evil. By the way, this whole movie is a Christmas movie. I didn't mention that. This is actually a Christmas movie, where it's about celebrating what is basically Christmas on Jirai, but it's also tied in with Earth Christmas, and the main cast is celebrating Earth Christmas. This is going to sound crazy, because this plot sounds absolutely fucking unhinged. This is actually a solid movie. I always enjoy a Ryoko-focused plotline, and the slow unraveling mystery about who's Tenchi's daughter is she actually Tenchi's daughter, and where the daughter came from, and more specifically, like, who the mom was, even if the result ended up being disappointing, actually turned out to be a relatively good watching experience. Tenchi in Tokyo is another spin-off universe of the Tenchi series. In this one, the characters are sort of distilled down to their bare essence, to the point where it borders on characterization, although one could almost argue at this point that the Tenchi characters themselves are almost more archetypes than actual characters, where it's sort of like when they show up in an alternate piece of media, they're used as an almost shorthand for the characters' personalities to be planted onto the characters without a real need to establish them because of their appearances in other Tenchi media. At this point, the Tenchi characters are almost sort of stock characters, and basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is that Tenchi Muyo is a modern-day commedia dell'arte. Anyway, basically, in this one, we have the same characters, and the basic setup is that Washu and Ryoko were trying to steal some bullshit. I forget what. I think it's like the gems or something that Tenchi's family was on, and Ayaka's group and the Galaxy Police tried to stop her, and they all ended up on Earth, and then 2 years passed. This is a separate universe, to be clear, and we have Kione in this timeline, which is always a plus, because she is more interesting than Noike. But this is very clearly not connected to any of the previous universes, just because the characters themselves do not have the same histories as those other characters. As I said, this really is just the essence of the characters itself. Ryoko is a space pirate, Washu is a scientist, Ayaka is a princess, and if anything, they sort of act with less depth and nuance in their other portrayals towards the beginning of this. But Tenchi ends up basically going to school in Tokyo, and he leaves all of the other girls behind. And there he meets this girl named Sakuya, who ends up becoming his girlfriend. Although, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, Sakuya is actually, let's say, working for, even though that is a very inaccurate term, the main villain, who is actually a sort of creation of Jirai, who ended up almost destroying Jirai 3,500 years ago, I think is what they said. Anyway, Tenchi ends up dating this Sakuya girl, which brings in conflict with the other girls. And it originally starts where he has conflict with Sakuya because he goes on a really cute date with Ryoko and she sees, but he ends up drifting towards Sakuya, and that causes the other girls to start drifting apart, where Ryoko goes back to space piracy, and then Kione and Mihoshi get really lucky, so they get reassigned because they actually took out a pretty high-class criminal. And so it sort of leaves Ayaka and Washu and Sasami back at the old Masaki house. But Washu starts to suspect that something's up, delves into her research, and of course finds out the main plot because she's what reveals the main plot. But I will say that the opening parts of this are very gag-based and comedy-focused, where we have the girls crashing in on Tenchi, and then he's like, get out of here, girls, and then it sort of repeats itself a lot and sort of delves into the idea that Tenchi is almost sort of put off by the craziness of his life. And I would have liked if the show explored this aspect more, because it is mentioned that Tenchi does find it disfavorable that his life is so crazy back at the Masaki Shrine. And if it was to explore this more and show that Tenchi was drifting towards Sakuya due to the sort of banality of her, I think it would have really added to the show. So I think there could have used some more exploration in the mundanity of Sakuya and Tenchi's appreciation of his new life in Tokyo. I think that was a little underdeveloped. Regardless, it does sort of tie into this theme that Tenchi is drifting towards this other girl who he meets in Tokyo, who is, for all intents and purposes, a lot more normal until we later find out towards the end she isn't. But at that point, they've already developed an actual relationship. And this is arguably the only Tenchi Muyo series where Tenchi, outside of a brief moment in Heianmuyo, the only universe where Tenchi actually chooses a girl, where he just happens to choose the wrong one in this circumstance. It is worth noting that this is the Tenchi Muyo series where he does have his actual original mom, but he does not appear to be a member of the Dry Royal family, and instead he appears to be an inheritor of the Guardians of Earth, where their job is to protect against extraterrestrial threat, which he sort of kind of does by keeping the girls locked in a love polygon. Regardless, where I think the show actually comes into its own is towards the second half, where all the characters are drifting apart, and there's sort of this mounting mystery where you get the idea of what are the villains trying to do, and it creates this sort of tension and interplay between the characters and their conflicting personalities. As Ryoko delves back into space piracy, we have Mihoshi and Kihone trying to capture her, but then there's conflict between Kihone and Mihoshi because Mihoshi doesn't actually want to capture Ryoko because she thinks that they can still redeem their friend. And this is also a story where Ryoko sort of takes on a more mature persona. As she has her date with Tenchi, she ends up becoming more trusting of him and that he will not drift towards Sakuya, although that, as it turns out, became incorrect. And we see a universe where Ayaka becomes an absolute nervous wreck, and it sort of delves a little bit. I mean, I would have liked more of an exploration with basically everything I'm mentioning in this entire review, but it does show that Ayaka does care for her friends and her companions, and that without them, Ayaka is probably the one that does the worst. And this interplay and conflict and interaction between the main casts of Tenchi Muyo is, I think, actually where Tenchi in Tokyo shines the most. Like I said, I would have liked more of an exploration and everything, but I think where the show goes in its second half, its first half is pretty weak, where it goes in its second half ends up being a pretty decent watch and did become enjoyable. Tenchi in Tokyo Specials is a series of vignettes where basically it's now worth noting actually that these are all linked together unlike most specials, but basically the main girls are going to Tokyo to kidnap Tenchi. Actually, I don't think they kidnap him in Tenchi. I think they kidnap him somewhere else. This doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. Point is, they're there to kidnap him. Well, Sakuya saw this coming, enlisted the help of her classmates, and they try to stop the girls from kidnapping Tenchi. They fail completely. Tenchi gets kidnapped, and the main cast brings him to a tower with a hot spring on top of it. It's sort of a funny imagery, where they basically just go hot springing with him, while Sakuya ends up going through a trapped jungle that Washu ended up trapping. And then she has to fight her way up a tower to save Tenchi from the girls, which makes the second Tenchi Muyo specials to reference the Bruce Lee movie Game of Death. Actually, wait, Tenchi in Tokyo came out in 97, something like that. So I actually think the season 3 specials that reference Game of Death came afterwards. So this is the first time, and then they do it again in 2003 in Tenchi Muyo season 3. Regardless, I guess someone on the Tenchi production committee just really enjoys that movie, because I don't think I've ever seen a series reference the same movie in two different unconnected scenarios. Anyway, they fight their way up, and then at the end, it's all revealed to be a dream by Sakuya, but then Tenchi really does get kidnapped at the end, and then she ends up putting on the gear that she was wearing when she was in the dream to actually unkidnap him. The idea is basically to be this sort of like funny gag thing, but Tenchi has sort of lost its comedic value sort of a long time ago, so I don't think it's super funny, but as far as specials go, I can at least appreciate that these aren't just random gags for the sake of them, and they at least tried to have some sort of narrative. Sasami Magical Girls Club is the, I guess, third attempt to make a Sasami Magical Girl anime. This has nothing to do with the other two, and the only real consistent thing between the two is that the main character Sasami, Ryo-Ohki shows up, the other Tenchi characters show up kind of, although this one really minimizes the numbers that show up, and there is another magical girl named Misao. However, this Misao in this show is not the same as the Misao from the TV or OVA series. The only similarity I would say they have is they're both depressed, but in fact, in this, basically Washu comes from a country, magical country, basically. And a long time ago, magical country and the witches split off and they created their own, like, magical land that in this show is reached via train. Very Harry Potter vibes on that. But anyway, so the magical users split off from humanity and then humanity came over here, but Sasami comes from a group of people that still have magic, so she has her magic at the start. So Washu comes over, and she initially tries to find magical girls and teach them to not use their powers. They want to get rid of the magical powers. But about midway through the show, it ends up becoming the idea that they're going to reveal magic to the world, and they just want to train the girls, the magical girls, if you will, how to use their magical powers better rather than just letting it go wild. So that makes a bit of a pivot midway through. And there is a bit of an explanation given, which is that someone knows how to open the witch's cauldron. We don't know what that means, but that's what Sasami's dad said, and Sasami's dad seems to know about what's going on in the plot. The thing is, it sounds super dramatic, and we know that the guy that Sasami gets a crush on is like captured and tied up at the end of the show, but that is like the only two moments of the tension that show that the show is going in any sort of dark direction. There's like no action scenes in the entire show. It's very much focused on the girls, their relationships, and the situations they find themselves in. It's very old school magical girl. Like, there's no action in it, pretty much. The most action-packed thing is that Sasami gets on a vacuum cleaner and uses that to fly instead of a broom. Anyway, so they end up creating a club full of other magical girls, all with their own different personalities. And I would say the one who is closest to old Misao is that they're the last one introduced is like this lesbian girl who has implied to be a neglectful, possibly abusive family with a lot of siblings, which is not the same thing as old Misao, so there's not like a one-to-one, but that's as close as we get. The only real similarity with the girl named Misao in this is the depression. They don't even look similar. All of the characters in this are basically different. Like, Washu is usually not this much of a raging bitch, which is basically the personality they gave her on intention. And the only other notable Tenchi character that appears in this one is Mihoshi, who is her normal ditzy Mihoshi self. They didn't really change Mihoshi, but that's basically it. They also changed to Sasami's mom again. Sasami's mom in this is kind of cool. She's better than the mom in the TV series, but I'm still saying OVA mom is the best one. Regardless, a lot of this is like interpersonal, like elementary school drama. It's like, oh, this character has a crush on this one's worried about getting socially isolated, blah, blah, blah. It's not bad. I don't hate anything that's happening, but it's worth noting that it's like heavily dependent on how much you're engaging with the characters and their drama and their narrative. And if I'm being totally honest with you, outside of a few chuckles I get here and there from the show, I'm not super engaged with the characters or the events that are happening in it, and therefore I'm not super engaged in the story itself. I guess you could say it's sort of interesting to see where it's going, But as we're rounding out the end of the Tenchi series and we get into the third Tenchi Magical Girl anime, if I'm being totally honest, I'm really just going to watch season 2 out of pure obligation at this point. Sasami Magical Girls Club 2 is a lot more action-packed, I should say, than the first season. Probably not a lot more, but definitely more. Like, there's actual fight scenes in this. I will say that a major focus of the fight scenes usually results in characters just sort of winning due to the power of friendship. And by that, I literally mean that they just like full face stop and then just like put their hands together and then they friendship glow. I don't literally mean that someone gets a power up and then they win the fight. It is really just like straight up, let's be friends, let's make flowers with magic. But yeah, so basically I don't remember if this part is fully in season 2. I think it was partially in season 1 where they go to the witch camp. But basically what happens is girls get invited back to another witch camp. And Sasami, I think, ends up like running away from home or something. No, she gets mind controlled. Yeah, that's right. She was going to run away from home, but then her mom gets mind controlled into letting her go, and her dad is still fucking around in the magical world. But anyway, we find out what the Great Cauldron is. I think I called it the Witch Cauldron last episode. It's the Great Cauldron. And basically a bunch of witches just put all of their hatred into this like one cauldron, and then they like sealed it inside of a person, basically. You know what? I might be a little bit wrong about that, but I'm going to be real with you. I'm close enough, and who the fuck cares? Anyway, basically, there's this entity in the cauldron that is just packed with, like, a bunch of witch hatred from, I think, what are known as the executives. I could get the order of that mixed up. Maybe the executives are just, like, tangentially related to the cauldron. I'm not fully clear on the details. Just follow me on this one, okay? Anyway, the big important thing is there's a super witch in the cauldron filled with a bunch of witch hatred. That's really what you need to know. The witch cult, I'm going to call them the cult. They're not called that, but fuck it, I'm just going to keep going. The witch cult wants to use Sasami's light magic to break out the hate witch from the Great Cauldron. And in order to do that, they end up like basically just trying to like indoctrinate them inside of their sort of like witchy summer camp. But what ends up happening is Washu and Sasami's dad and the guy who's also there, they end up going to there and they rescue the girls from the summer camp. And this is one of the issues with the season, because this is one of those situations where the problems could be so easily solved if characters actually had a dialogue. Because one of the girls, Misao, now again, remember, this is not the same Misao from the other two OVAs. This is an even differenter Misao. She always had like sort of like dark, creepy powers. She was kept isolated. I might have mentioned that in the part 1 review. But basically, she found a sort of home in the summer school when she was with the other witch girls there. And she doesn't want to leave, and Washu absolutely adamantly refuses to explain why the fuck the girls have to leave the summer school. And they don't get this dialogue, and they do not explain why they should be leaving the summer school until like midway through the season. And genuinely, 90% of the problems caused in this season are directly related to Washu and the adults' absolute refusal to explain to the Magical Girls Club why they should be wary of the witches and the sorceress, who is the leader of the witch cult. And if they just explained to the girls what the problem is, none of this would end up happening. But instead, Washu's like, we're going, and then she slaps Misao. And obviously, you know, Misao's not fucking fond of that happening. So when the witch cult shows back up and they're like, hey, Misao, we want you to join us. And she, of course, has this issue with like this boy she has a crush on who has a crush on Sasami. She's like, yeah, you know what? Fuck it. I'm joining the witch cult. And so Misao ends up joining the witch cult, yada, yada, yada. She gets possessed by the super hate witch at one point and becomes a super hate witch. And they end up stopping that plot line through the power of friendship. And what I would argue is an absolutely insignificant amount of time. Like the whole Misao heel turn is so very brief that they might as well not have even done it. I'm going to be honest, when they did it, I was like rolling my eyes. I'm like, this is fucking dumb and played out and predictable, because I was actually appreciating that in season 1, they didn't have a Misao heel turn. So when they do it in season 2, I'm like, oh God, I can't believe they were just saving it. Oh my God. And then they get it over with in like 2 episodes and they get her unpossessed by the hate witch. And it's over so quickly, they might as well not have even done it. And I honestly, if they were going to do it, they could have at least added some gravitas to it. So you might be like, hey, Sak, you seem dissatisfied with how quickly they got over the arc, even though you weren't excited for the arc in the first place. Isn't that a contradiction? No, I'd have preferred if they just didn't do that in the first place. If you didn't do it at all, I would have had no issues with that. Anyway, I don't want to hate on the season 2 too hard. I will say it is actually marginally better than season 1, just not enough to bump it up a point or anything, because I still didn't really like it. But regardless, after that, we have this whole plot line where the sorceress is like, fine, I'll be evil myself. And then she unseals the Great Cauldron, and then the Hate Witch comes up. And then they beat the Hate Witch. And that whole thing lasts like an episode or two. Like really just like one episode, I feel like, is the real dedicated time to the whole Hate Witch Sorcerer arc. It feels like it's over so abruptly. And it ends on a bit of a cliffhanger where the like a guy who has a crush on Sasami's dad, but Sasami has a crush on him, which creates for a really weird relationship dynamic, really weird age dynamic also, because he seems like he's a teenager and Sasami's dad is like a full-grown adult, but Sasami's like a little girl. So it's just like a weird thing going around in general with that whole relationship. But anyway, yeah, at the end, he's just like sort of like passed out in a coma. And she doesn't like wake up or anything. It just ends on his face. So it's a really sort of weird, abrupt, anticlimactic ending all around. And so what happens with Sasami Magical Girls Club 2 is that it sets up all these plot lines, and then it sort of feels like it doesn't have any interest in exploring them. Like it itself has already gotten bored of its own plot lines, and then it just tries to end them as quick as possible. It's very anticlimactic, not very well developed. It is better because at least the show is sort of going somewhere in season 2, but that's really not saying a lot. And I would say that overall, both seasons, especially season 1, but notably season 2, are incredibly forgettable and should totally be skipped by basically everyone. Tenchi Muyo is another Tenchi Muyo spinoff, supposedly celebrating the franchise's 20th anniversary. Now, there is some speculation that this might occur in the Tenchi universe continuity, but I will assure you it definitely does not, because at one point they encounter Mihoshi, who comments that she is undercover investigating what appears to be a space-time disturbance, and the main cast seems surprised about this being a space-time disturbance, as if they were unfamiliar with the concept, which definitely does not track with the events of Tenchi Universe. Now, they do make mention of an alliance between Earth and the Galaxy Police, which is something that occurs, as far as I'm aware, only in the main continuity, but this is definitely not main continuity either, because the Galaxy Police attack Washu in this, and she seems to not be a god in this. So, if I had to guess, Tenchi Muyo is its own separate continuity that borrows from Universe and borrows from the main continuity. And more to this point, this actually has, like, teenage Sasami. Sasami's usually a little girl in most of the continuities, and this has teenage Sasami. More evidence that this isn't a universe continuity version is that we don't see Nuike or Kioni. We don't see either of them, and they should both be here if it was either universe or if it was main continuity. Regardless, what happens is Washu and Ryoko and Tenchi and Ayaka and Sasami, they're all together. Mihoshi is off being a Galaxy police officer. This is actually one of the most competent we've ever seen in Mihoshi, further evidence that this can't be any other continuity other than its own. And basically Washu says to Tenchi that she accidentally lost some people during an experiment and he needs to help her go get them. Well, we are slowly revealed on this because we do a cold open in this show, and let me tell you right now, this show makes an absolutely terrible first impression. Like, the first several episodes, I'm like, I hate everything that's happening. I have no interest, and this entire show seems aimless. And it all comes online by the end. It just has such terrible pacing, but we'll get more to those after we get past the synopsis. Point is, what actually happens is that Tenchi manages to find the people that get lost, and then through his Jirai powers and what appears to be the Jirai powers of this girl that he's supposed to find, they end up getting flung into, I think, future Earth, basically. So Tenchi decides to go help them because he's partially responsible, and it's basically an all-girls school where he ends up being a sort of student teacher for the all-girls school. Now, the school itself is kind of crazy. it's sort of very Nejima coded, where the school has a lot of like wacky, insane bullshit. Like there's like a robot that lives in the sports center, and they have all of these crazy school rules, and they just have a lot, like an entire fucking maze comprised of like school equipment in the basement. It's very crazy. It's very quirky school. And it turns out that the principal is actually an undercover Galaxy police officer. So I guess that's where a bit of some of the weirdness comes in. But anyway, the crux of this is basically the conflict between Tenchi trying to get the girls back from the other world, but they've both lost their memory and also partially grown up. And they are embroiled in a conflict between the science club and the student council, with one of the girls, Tenchi, trying to get back being like the head of the student council. And Washu ends up being the one that is backing the science club to try and find a treasure which will help send them back. So there's this huge conflict spanning throughout the course of the show that you don't get into in the opening, because what was really wrong with the show is that it's 50 episodes, but they're 4-minute episodes each, so it's actually not hard to watch. But the problem is it ends up creating with this sort of like breakneck, sort of disjointed also sort of pacing, because the episodes have to tell a complete story in 4-minute chunks every single time, and then it goes so fast because there's not that much runtime in the first place. There's not enough runtime for this entire show. Honestly, it needs more time to digest. This should have been like a 12, 13 episode anime, and it would have actually been totally fine. It would have been a better product. Point is that the opening heavily relies on the old chestnut of like Tenchi seeing some panties, or one of the girls is a lesbian and gets jealous that Tenchi ends up in a sort of pseudo-sexual scenario with one of the other girls, and then they like punch him, or they hit him, or they threaten his dick. There's a lot of dick threatening in this. If you're squeamish about your dick getting threatened, this is not the show for you. So it very heavily leans into old school slapstick humor throughout the entire course of the show, and it does get tiresome. But right around the midpoint of the show, maybe a little earlier than that, about roughly 25% in, the show begins to unveil itself that the reason a lot of the opening episodes seem aimless and seem like nothing's really happening and seem disjointed is because it's absolutely doing a terrible job of telling its story in a proper order and makes things unnecessarily confusing, probably because it just wanted to get onto its premise quicker. But it's not just aimlessly telling irrelevant stories, it's sort of endearing to you and establishing the characters that will be used throughout the rest of the course of the show. And about 25% in, I was getting more on board with it, and then about halfway in, I found myself being like, okay, all right, this show's sort of coming online. And then once we get to the Galaxy police attack towards the end, and we start understanding Tenchi's motivation and all of the other girls' motivations, I ended up actually liking the full cast of the newly established characters. And what I also appreciate is that we still have the old, like, main cast members. They still appear occasionally, even if they're not necessarily main characters, but the existence of these new characters doesn't diminish the older characters. So, for example, they challenge like Ayaka and Ryoko to a fight at one point, and they fucking win because they're Ayaka and Ryoko. And I appreciate that it's able to build up a new cast without diminishing the old cast. So, surprisingly enough, despite the incredibly rocky start, Tenchi Muyo is actually pretty good. Twitch and Discord in the description. Thanks for watching. I have been Sacrabolic, your envoy of hope, and this has been WIWR. Bye-bye.